I am General Paul D. Hawkins, commander of the U.S. Military Assistance Command in Vietnam. Here today, the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines are joined together in a common effort to help this country. Nowhere in the world today are we more aware of the inseparability of the problems of a people involved in fighting a war and building a nation than in Vietnam. For here is the rendezvous of all the historical forces in this century. The communists have long sought to take over in Vietnam, and the first phase of struggle after World War II resulted in the North-South petition directly reflecting our divided world. Now, this young nation, remaining on freedom's side, is engaged in a war which is as hidden and stealthy as it is relentless and exhausting. Responding to the request of the Republic of Vietnam, the United States has come to help, as we have helped and are helping all free people who seek to defend themselves from the communist scourge. The U.S. effort to our Vietnamese allies is a vast and comprehensive one. It involves political, economic, psychological, and military measures. All of the armed forces of the U.S. play a part. Because our efforts here are so comprehensive, the whole story cannot be told in 30 minutes. Today, our focus is on the U.S. Army Special Forces, one important part of our overall effort.
I'm James Arness. During the next 30 minutes, you're going to meet a remarkable group of Americans, members of the United States Army's Special Forces on duty in South Vietnam. The Republic of Vietnam, on the eastern edge of the Indochina Peninsula, is about as far from home as an American can be while still on Earth. When it's 7 o'clock in the morning here in Saigon, it's 7 o'clock the previous night in New York City. Army Special Forces were sent to Vietnam because they're experts, specialists in training men to fight a special kind of war. It's a dirty war, fought without uniforms on a battlefield without boundaries. A war where the friendly farmer you pass in a rice paddy may become a murderous enemy the instant the sun goes down. Sunset is beautiful in South Vietnam, but then night comes. And at night in Vietnam, men die. The communist guerrilla lives off the people, by persuasion if possible, but if propaganda fails, by terror. Fear and propaganda have turned the isolated villages of Southeast Asia into a theater of war, a war which can only be won or lost by the villagers themselves. What Americans can do is combat fear by giving them guns and the training they need to defend themselves against terrorism. And we can reply to the propaganda by actions. We can bring to these remote areas some tangible proof that the way of life we propose is a good life, worth fighting for. This is the story of a small group of Americans who are quietly trying to do that job, now in the swamps and jungles of Vietnam. Sizes, wearing different labels. But one thing they all have in common: the innocent suffer. The guerrilla warfare being conducted against the Republic of Vietnam by the Vietnamese communists, the Viet Cong, isn't new. We saw it with minor variations in China, in Malaya, in Greece, in the Philippines, in Cuba, in Laos. It's a kind of war which recognizes no non-combatants. In Vietnam, the communist guerrillas promise progress, yet their favorite targets for assassination are school teachers, doctors, engineers, anyone trying to do today what they promise for tomorrow. Life will be lived on their terms or not at all. What happens to Vietnam will depend in the end on who wins the villages. And the government of the United States has determined that it won't be communist guerrillas. This is Major General William B. Rawson. He was then a brigadier on a recent visit to a strategic village high in the mountains of central Vietnam. As Special Assistant to the Chief of Staff for Special Warfare, he has come to inspect the village defense system, established here by a 12-man Special Forces team, a handful of Americans who in a few short months have converted a remote, guerrilla-infested highland plateau into a major training center of anti-communist tribesmen. We asked General Rawson to describe the war in Vietnam and the role of the Special Forces soldier.
There are many terms which might be used to characterize the conflict now occurring in Vietnam. For the general public, the best known probably is guerrilla warfare. However we refer to it, there can be no question that armed insurgency on a large scale is taking place aimed at the destruction of a people's national independence. It is the policy of the United States government to advise and assist the people of the Republic of Vietnam in their struggle to defeat the communist insurgency which strives to eradicate their freedom. The American soldiers you will see in this film are part of our assistance effort. As members of the U.S. Army's Special Forces, they are among the most highly trained military personnel the world has known. Each of them has been trained in a variety of skills which in more conventional organizations would be distributed among 2 or more individuals. These soldiers possess the capability of going to remote, primitive regions of the world to live with the people, eat their food or share their lack of it, learn their language, their customs and taboos, and win their confidence and respect. The future of such areas as Southeast Asia ultimately may be determined by events taking place in remote jungle villages which appear on no maps, by acts of violence occurring only under the cover of darkness, by wars which can be won or lost before the world is aware that a war has even begun. This film documents a small part of what the armed forces, and particularly your Army, is doing to assure that such conflicts, wherever they may be forced upon us, can be resisted successfully by ourselves and our allies.
I'm Captain Ron Shackleton, Detachment Commander of the Special Forces personnel in this area. American advisors first began laying the groundwork for village defense in this region in September 1961. At that time, the villagers in this area were almost completely defenseless against the predatory tactics of the Viet Cong, the Vietnamese communists. Out of fear, these mountain people were forced to both feed and house roving Viet Cong patrols, and their young men were often forced into Viet Cong activities in order to protect the lives of their families. Our effort during the months we have been here have been to teach the mountaineers, who call themselves the Raw Day people, that they are capable of defending themselves against such tactics, that they need not be afraid. We have shown the Raw Day how to build stockade-type fences and how to maintain 24-hour security. This is Master Sergeant John Slover, who has just returned from observing a patrol. Through an interpreter, he will comment on his observations. Dwayne, tell the patrol that they did a very good job today. There's just one point I want to stress. Some carried their weapon down like this. Carry their weapon out the ready at all times. Where their eyes are, so is the muzzle of their weapon. Not all our advisors rely on interpreters. Here we see Sergeant Bill Belch instructing the carbine in fluent Vietnamese.
Đây là khẩu súng carabine là K30. Trước khi Hảo lắp và tháo khẩu súng này, tôi sẽ nói qua về những tính cách của khẩu súng này. Muốn bắn chết một tên quân địch, cách các anh có lẽ chừng 300 thước thì được với khẩu súng này, nhưng xa hơn thì chắc là không được. Nhưng mà thường thường trong những khu vực như thế này, như là rừng hay là có nhiều cây, thì thường thường không trông thấy xa được. Thế thì nếu một tên quân địch gần.
Basic instruction in the care and use of a weapon, familiar to any veteran of the U.S. Army. In this class, one of our raw day instructors is teaching his men a technique in search and seizure for arresting Viet Cong agents. Many such agents conceal themselves in friendly villages disguised as ordinary workmen. These men are from surrounding villages. They have come to our village seeking training which will enable them to provide their own defense against guerrilla bands. It is not unusual to see 200 or more of these people each week. Outside the village gate is a sign which says, "Here no Viet Cong need apply for rice or any other assistance, that this is a free village which is no longer afraid." We have taught our friends small unit tactics and given them modern equipment with which to defend themselves. People who once defended their freedom with a crossbow are now learning to use rifles, submachine guns, and grenades.
Ma! And up, now! Bat! Da, doa, 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 da, doa.
Today, these Rade people, who are in some ways very primitive by American standards, are among the best anti-guerrilla fighters in Southeast Asia. As our program expands, new Special Forces teams are moving into other villages, always with the same goal, to teach people who value their independence how to preserve it.
Okay, Odie, your boys got all your equipment. You're all set to go just about now, aren't you?
Just done.
Okay, fine. Well, you know that we're going to have trouble to the south. When we first set the circle up here, VC didn't know what we were doing. It took them about a month to really figure out just what we're about to do there. So when we move to the south, they already know just about what we're going to do. And once we start building up the same defensive systems we had up here, they're going to try and hit us as soon as we start. So we're going to have to watch that.
Well, Odie, for the past couple of weeks, you and your team have been here observing my team work with the Rade people in village defense. You've been exposed to some of our training problems, our logistical problems, and some of the problems that arise from working through interpreters. If there are any questions that you or your team have at this time, or any other way that we can help you, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, Ron. The last 2 weeks have been very beneficial as far as our team is concerned. We've learned a lot, as what you mentioned, the interrogation and so forth, and the training with the Rade, working through interpreters. There's one point that you can help us with, though, is on this field headquarters there you've got set up. Where we're going, we'll probably be working decentralized training rather than centralized, and the results you have may help us down there. But when we go to the other area, I'm afraid that we're going to have a few more problems down there that we don't have here. For example, a different tribe, and plus we're working with two different types of group of people, the Dips and the Male tribe. And we can take what you have given us here and then modify it to meet the situation down there. As far as equipment-wise, I think we pretty well got everything you had. How about lesson plans and training schedules there?
We're okay on that, but we'll probably have to make some changes as our situation goes along.
Okay, Van, how about the commo situation? It's pretty well in hand?
Well, we'll try the same system they're using here. If that don't work, we'll change it.
The villages of Southeast Asia were old in the days of Julius Caesar. Throughout their long history, they have been regularly conquered, oppressed, liberated, and invaded again. In the best of times, lives here are neither long nor easy. Maybe it's not surprising that the villagers of Vietnam have simple ideas about what makes a friend. Friends are people who help. Medics of a rather special kind are part of a special forces team to care for their own men. But in isolated, often disease-ridden hamlets where no doctor has ever gone, a special forces medic with his extensive specialized training may be the only contact with modern medicine the people will ever have.
Okay. I'll give you this slip here. Write down the medicine and you can pick it up.
The use of military personnel to win friends as well as to fight is gaining ground in Vietnam. A villager is likely to be more interested in a new roof for his house than in the outcome of the Cold War or the threat of communism. The training and advising of Vietnamese civic action teams for work in the villages of Vietnam may be one of our major contributions to the defeat of communism in Southeast Asia. But if good works are an answer to communist propaganda, they're not enough to repel the guerrilla terrorism which invariably follows when propaganda fails. This is the village of Hoc Thien, near the coast of the South China Sea. By refusing food and volunteers to Viet Minh guerrillas, these villagers subject themselves to 250 guerrilla attacks in 5 years. That's an average of one a week. They're about to show an American visitor how they survived. A typical alert, which here is more often real than practice. The village has been organized into a small fort. When the alert sounds, every man, woman, and child has either a place to hide or a post to defend. They've defended it so well that guerrilla attacks have virtually ceased. The price of extorting food and supplies has become too big for the guerrillas to pay. And it's worth remembering that they did this all on their own. Americans are now giving them weapons and technical advice. But in this case, we're only making a good thing better, and maybe making life a little easier for a town full of brave people. All the bravery in the world won't win a war from behind a stockade fence. Sooner or later, you have to take the fight to the enemy, whether he's an army or only a band of guerrillas prowling the surrounding jungle. At a Special Forces training camp outside Saigon, volunteers from the village of Hoc Thien are training to carry their war outside the gates. These training missions can be interesting. The jungle is never safe. And when you practice searching for guerrillas hiding in jungle villages, you're always liable to find some. this school, nobody has trouble keeping the students awake. A moment's carelessness can lead to disaster. You don't cross a clearing, pass a temple, or walk through a cemetery without making sure. Natives of the Vietnamese highlands have nothing to learn from Americans about jungle living. But they do need help in mastering the tactics and using the modern weapons which communist-trained guerrillas are using against them. Like mountain people everywhere, they are natural soldiers who learn fast. These are men of the Nung Chinese, training at a special forces camp near the town of Da Nang. They are already some of the most experienced anti-guerrilla fighters in Southeast Asia. In 1954, 25 of these same men turned back an assault by 1,000 Viet Minh soldiers, killing 600 in the process. These are mountain people of the Katang tribe. They and their U.S. instructors are drawing rations of dried shrimp and rice for a week-long jungle patrol. A joint training exercise with soldiers of the regular Vietnamese Army. It will have the added practical advantage of making life difficult for a battalion of Viet Cong guerrillas who happen to be using the same jungle. The main problem in taking the fight to the guerrillas in Vietnam or anywhere else in Southeast Asia is terrain. Ordinary means of travel are too slow to counter the hit-and-run tactics of communist guerrillas. One answer to that problem is the helicopter. Helicopters manned by pilots trained to fly at treetop level can bring troops into a guerrilla-occupied area the moment their presence becomes known. The helicopter also increases the staying power of the anti-guerrilla patrols. With fresh supplies of food and medicine available in the heart of the jungle itself, patrols like these can cover a lot of territory, stay until they find what they came for. The communist guerrilla is beginning to learn that there are fewer places to hide in the jungles of Vietnam. Some of the Viet Cong guerrillas are hardcore communists, prepared to die for a cause in which, unfortunately, they sincerely believe. But the Viet Cong also includes men, many of them, who only want an alternative. Men like this young Rade tribesman, who a few days ago deserted the guerrillas and came to a special forces team. seeking protection.
His name is Trung, 22 years old.
How long has he been with the VC?
He has been with the VC 2 months, since January.
Why did he join the VC?
He joined VC because VC forced him, pressed him to go in jungle.
Why did he desert the VC?
He deserted VC because he does not like the life of VC, and he treats badly many people, steal rights, and work hard.
Why did he come to our specific training area?
He come here because he knows that program in Now is for Rade people and for Rade benefit, and he want to work here to help Rade people to have better life.
How large was the group of VC that he was with?
40 people with him.
It will be a long while in Vietnam before any swords are beaten into plowshares. But the time will come. What the people want is peace. Peace and a chance for a better life. The Communist Viet Cong promises them progress, but in the meantime, creates a world where peaceful citizens must go armed in fear of their lives. What the Viet Cong guerrilla really wants is power. What he can't control, he tries to destroy. In South Vietnam, the old promises don't work as well as they used to. And so the guerrilla resorts more and more to terrorism, is at war with his own people. The Vietnamese are an ancient race and an independent one. This is not the first time they've fought for the right to decide their own destiny. For 2,000 years, they've defended that right against all the emperors of China, against the cavalry of Kublai Khan, against modern armies using machine guns and airplanes. Given time, they will send today's would-be oppressors to join the others in defeat. Our purpose in Vietnam is to give them that time.
This is the Alto Beni region of Bolivia in South America. Site of a land colonization project, it is literally a new frontier. It is one of many new frontiers unfolding today in our sister republics to the south. Frontiers springing from the same needs, the same hopes, the same aspirations which once beckoned pioneers to our own far west. And here, as on that earlier, older American frontier of another era, the United States Army has a role to play and a mission to accomplish. My name is Ray Morgan. Most Americans are aware of the United States Army's role in the development of our own West, a saga which began with exploration in the days of Thomas Jefferson and ended with the cavalry charging over the hill to protect wagon trains from Indian raids in the days following the Civil War. We are familiar, too, with the continuing work of the Army's Corps of Engineers in such crucial enterprises as flood control. This is the background which your Army today is bringing in the form of technical advice and experience to the armed forces of Latin America in their own efforts to serve as well as to defend their own countries. The program is called Civic Action. This is La Paz, the city of peace, some 13,000 feet up in the Bolivian Andes. It has been said that airplanes do not land in La Paz. They merely fly along and stop. So rarefied is the air in this capital city of the Altiplano, the high plateau region of the Andes, that new arrivals must often resort to oxygen masks during their first few days. To the residents, however, it is a healthy climate, cool and inviting, and one in which are sometimes performed awesome feats of human endurance. Bolivia's population, the thin, cool air of the Altiplano is the ideal place to live. And this is a Bolivian problem. For the Indian farmer, who makes up the majority of Bolivia's population, has for centuries lived a precarious existence on a dry, almost sterile, overpopulated soil, clinging to the mountains of his birth, while vast regions of fertile lowlands remain untouched by human hands. Abandoned to lush and useless jungle. For centuries, only a small portion of Bolivia's arable land has been under cultivation, despite the existence of millions of landless peasants in other parts of the country. Until 1960, this was part of Bolivia's unused, inaccessible jungle. What has happened since here in the Alto Beni region through the joint efforts of the Bolivian and American governments is perhaps the best example in South America of what a civic action program can really accomplish.
I'm Captain Alfredo Luro of Bolivia. The area about which Mr. Morgan speaks, the Alto Beni, is a rich valley lying along the Beni River, some 250 kilometers from La Paz, our capital city. In 1959, some 35,000 acres of this rich land was set aside by our government for colonization by families of the Aymara Indians, a people who for centuries have suffered the privations of life on the harsh Altiplano. First, with help and technical advice from the United States Aid Mission, a road was cut through the jungle, connecting the area with the nearest town, Caranavi, 76 kilometers away. Meanwhile, families were being carefully screened for their suitability to develop the colony. Physical examinations were given, medical attention, and immunization shots were needed. You must understand that for one who has grown up on the highlands of the Altiplano, moving to the low, hot regions of a valley like the Alto Beni is like moving to a strange land which has a totally different climate. Yet they did come, thousands of them, coming from the cold Altiplano their clothing is unsuited to the tropical climate of the Alto Beni, and in most cases, they are too poor to buy even the simplest clothing. And so, the head of each family is issued a pair of work trousers, 2 shirts, a hat, sandals. For most of these men, the simplest form of factory-made hoe or shovel is a modern tool of agriculture. Since these are farmers, there is also animal life. Each family receives 3 chickens, 1 rooster and 2 hens, all from purebred stock. Also, each community has available a purebred boar for breeding with sows owned by the new settlers. But the real reward is land, 30 acres of it. 30 acres of land and a house. Not much of a house, a temporary structure, but it will last until the settler can build his own permanent dwelling. Of the 30 acres awarded to each family, 5 have been cleared in advance by men of the Bolivian army. 2.5 acres have been planted in crops that will provide the immediate needs of the family for fresh food. The other 2.5 acres of cleared fields may be used by the settler to plant any crop of his choice. By agreement, the remaining 25 acres belonging to each family must be planted in crops determined by agricultural experts to be most suited to the land and most in demand in the marketplace. Some parts of our new community might seem strange to North American eyes. Our cleared fields, for instance, with the tree stumps still standing. But since cultivation is done by hand, not by machines, the stumps are no problem. In this climate, they will soon rot away, helping to enrich this virgin, already fertile soil. The houses, too, are clustered together in communities. The plan was to have each family's house in the midst of its own fields. But it quickly became apparent that the Indians, used to the tribal custom of living closely together, became lonely when separated. And so we changed the plan to fit the people. There are 16 houses in each community and 5 communities in the project. Alto Beni is only the first of such projects. As fast as the Bolivian Army and the technical advisors from the Military Assistance Program here in Bolivia can build new roads, clear fields, and build the houses, other fertile valleys will be opened up to settlers, giving them an opportunity to attain, through their own hard work, a far better way of life than they or their ancestors have ever known.
The Alto Beni resettlement program is the largest presently working as part of the United States aid program for Latin America. A pilot program for others to follow, it is already making possible a new life for people who until just a short time ago had no future beyond bare existence. We share our hemisphere with many such people. The 200 million citizens of Latin America occupy a potentially rich landmass, more than 2.5 times the size of the United States. Yet, more than half suffer from infectious or dietary disease. And more than half have never slept in a bed. Perhaps the main problem, the obstacle which stands in the way of solution for so many others, is illiteracy. In many parts of Latin America, as many as 3 citizens out of 4 cannot read or write. Without education, development of a modern industrial nation is obviously impossible. In the Latin American Republic of Colombia, the illiteracy rate is such that the average Army recruit spends much of his time in service simply learning to read and write. This situation has now been recognized as a perfect opportunity for the emerging concept of Army civic action. Civic action in Colombia, as elsewhere in Latin America, is a way of using the organization and technical skills of the nation's army to attack pressing social problems. Civilian and military officials of the government, working with various forms of United States assistance and technical advice, have inaugurated here an integrated, intensive program of teaching people to read and write, beginning with the young Army recruit, who will eventually take this knowledge back to his home community.
I am Emilio Rojas, a lieutenant in the Colombian Army. This is the little town of Fosca, high up in the rugged mountains of the Colombian Andes. Scenically, it is beautiful. But one does not live on scenery, and for Fosca's few thousand inhabitants, life is often hard. This is how Army Civic Action first came to Fosca on a recent Sunday, officially designated Civic Action Day. Civic Action Day in Fosca, as in other towns throughout the nation, was a kind of an announcement, an advertisement to tell the local population that something new was about to happen. It was an occasion for farmers to bring their produce in for sale. For everyone involved in the project, including U.S. advisors, to meet and participate in a concerted demonstration of what civic action aims to accomplish. Stations were set up around the village square to which people with a problem might go for assistance. A Colombian Army veterinarian, for instance, was on hand to take care of livestock problems. For the pressing problems of the communities very poor, there was a free food distribution from Army commissary stores. There were movies for the children, repair of household pots and pans for the madres, and shoe repairs for everybody. There were haircuts, and free soft drinks. There were medical examinations and medicine. But the event was primarily an introduction for things to come, a way of dramatizing this new program, so that those for whom it is intended would be encouraged to come forth and make use of it. Better means of transportation, by road and by air, will itself do much to further Colombia's economic advance. Here, too, civic action is extremely active. This operation, involving Colombian Army personnel and U.S. technical advisors, is designed to create an airstrip capable of handling larger cargo-carrying aircraft near the town of Melgar. Already at Melgar, a water purification plant has been constructed and is now regularly operated by Colombian Army personnel. a measure of preventive hygiene. It is typical of such programs planned for rural areas throughout Colombia. This is the Tolima Highway project. When completed, it will provide an all-weather road into an area which today is inaccessible except by mule or on foot. Working from opposite ends of the road, two Colombian Army engineer units have so far completed about half of the 200 kilometers of roads and bridges. During this project, we have had the continuous assistance of experts from the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Their work and advice has served as a valuable training program for our own military engineers. In Colombia, the Army represents today more than a means for national defense. It is a repository of skills and technical knowledge which can be drawn upon by all our people. Trained personnel of the Army are today bringing their skills to the immediate problems of their countrymen, while at the same time they endeavor to pass on those skills to coming generations that they may be better able to help themselves. This, in Colombia, is the meaning of civic action.
Largest of the Latin American civic action programs, which might be described as putting armies to their maximum peacetime use, is the Civic Action Program of Ecuador. Here in this Andean nation, which literally straddles the equator, the United States Department of Defense has committed some $1,800,000 to the development of a civic action program as broad as the needs of a people struggling against the iron rule of inherited poverty.
I am Guillermo Ortiz Diaz of the Ecuadorian Army. This is our capital city of Quito, nestled in a valley sometimes called the Avenue of Volcanoes. Only 15 miles from the equator, it's almost 2 miles above sea level, so that days are warm and nights are cool. In Quito, the past merges with the present. Centuries before modern Quito was founded by the Spaniards, it was the capital of the Indian kingdom of Quito. Later, it bowed to the mighty Incas, who made it capital of their northern kingdom. Both in Quito and in smaller cities, scattered throughout the Andean highlands, Indians are still a major part of the Ecuadorian scene. Long before our country was settled by the Spaniards, Indians were bringing their products to the village market to trade for products brought by other Indians from as far off as the headwaters of the Amazon. Early on Saturday morning, Indians still come down from the hills to bring their wares to the market. Their customs have changed little over the centuries. Their blankets and shawls are fine and durable and much in demand, but they are shrewd bargainers. Picturesque as such scenes appear, they must in time give way to more modern techniques. We can no longer afford methods such as these for the drying of cocoa beans, for example. Some of the world's most beautiful harbors, here in Ecuador, are the site also of much poverty. These tank trucks contain pure water, which in parts of the country is a precious commodity the poor cannot afford. Recently, Civic Action in Ecuador has built 10 1,000-gallon water tanks in a region where until now, whole families were often left with only 25 gallons of water for an entire month. 5 large tank trucks now haul water to key distribution centers, which together serve some 60,000 people. In a short time, and at little cost, the distribution system has raised the average family water supply to 100 gallons a day. At the distribution point, each family has its own 55-gallon drum in which to store water until it's taken home. Water, a simple necessity of life, is for these children of Guayaquil a great and noble luxury. Demolition experts of the Ecuadorian and the United States armies are also working to improve transportation between the highlands of the Andes and the coastal lowlands. Lack of adequate means of transportation between these regions is still an economic handicap. There has been much progress, but in the highlands of the interior are still some of the most isolated inhabited portions of South America. Irrigation is another problem now under attack. Our army has the manpower for such essential projects as the digging of canals, and we are putting that manpower to work. Both road building and irrigation programs are profiting from the use of United States equipment and technical advisors from the United States Military Assistance Program. Whether with cranes and bulldozers or simple hand tools, progress is being made. Sometimes they might be easier ways, but the easy way is not available. And so it's done the hard way. The important thing is that the work go forward and that everyone participate who has time and strength or skill. There are more efficient ways to make logs into planks, but where other means are lacking, it's surprising what can be done by handwork and determination. Civic action in Ecuador begins with the army, but it includes men and women from every walk of life. This is a typical street building program in a provincial city. The methods are sometimes slow and primitive, but they work. One must begin somewhere, and the way to begin is begin. Military civic action in Ecuador, as elsewhere in Latin America, is only part of an overall program in which are involved many agencies of our own government, the Alliance for Progress, and the United Nations, as well as the Military Assistance Program of the United States. With so much to be done, there is work for everyone. Today, more than half of all the people of Latin America are without sufficient food, and most of them live out their lives without medical attention of any kind. These are problems which must be attacked from all sides, with every resource at our disposal. Unless we are prepared to see poverty and disease of the body converted to a disease of the soul by the prophets of communism. Without doubt, the most important object of all our efforts is education. All Latin America needs doctors, engineers, and technicians. We must have educated men and women able to master scientific agriculture and the work of modern industrialization. Right now in Latin America, there are some 20 million children waiting to begin their education. When they are well started, when new generations have acquired the priceless gift of literacy, many of our other problems will begin to solve themselves.
It was Thomas Jefferson who gave our own army a major responsibility for development of the American frontier. Beginning with the Lewis and Clark expedition of 1804, Army explorers did much to open vast regions of the North American continent to settlement and civilization. Remembering Jefferson's unfailing concern for the welfare of the common man, it seems more than likely that he would be pleased to see the armies of the southern half of our hemisphere today assuming similar responsibilities in the program we call civic action.
Beneath this barren mass of rock and snow, 14,000 feet up in the Peruvian Andes, lies the lost city of Ranrairca. There are many lost cities in Peru, but Ranrairca is unique. For until 6:13, on the evening of January 10th, 1962, it was a thriving community of 3,000 or 4,000 human souls. At that instant, towering Mount Huascaran hurled into the valley below 3 million tons of ice, snow, rock, and mud, engulfing in just 7 minutes the town and all it contained. Today, Ranrairca is the site of a modern scientific detective story, part of the continent-spanning story of today's big picture. This is the Canal Zone headquarters of one of the most interesting organizations of the United States Army, the Inter-American Geodetic Survey. It is familiar throughout Latin America as the Servicio Geodesico Interamericano. This is the IAGS Director, Colonel John E. Unperfirth of the Corps of Engineers.
During World War II, U.S. forces learned the hard way what it is to fight in lands not covered by accurate maps. In fact, even in the United States, less than half of the area is covered by accurate large-scale maps. In 1946, the Inter-American Geodetic Survey was activated to assist Latin America in solving this problem. The bulk of the mapping work being performed in each of the 16 Latin American countries is being performed by indigenous personnel of each country. The IAGS is an engineer unit assigned to the United States Army Southern Command. Our most important objective is to establish in each country a self-sufficient mapping organization. In terms of dollars, the Latin American countries spend more on the program than we do. Whereas we have 640 employees, the Latin American countries have over 4,000 people participating. Most of these Latin American technicians are trained right here in our IAGS cartographic school in the Canal Zone. The school is the technical training center of the 8,000 square miles of territory over which our program currently operates.
I'm Ken Reinhardt, an instructor here at the Cartographic School. And this is one of the classrooms where students from all over Latin America are assembled every few months to receive intensive instruction in the extremely complicated techniques of modern map making. In this single group, for example, are technicians from 11 different countries.
Antonio Arguedas, Costa Rica.
Domingo Riquelme, Panamá.
Tania Gutiérrez, Nicaragua.
Teniente Enrique Sangri, de México.
The classes in the school are all, of course, conducted in Spanish. But linguistic ability is only one of the many special skills required of our personnel. Now, you take the average man who drives into a filling station and picks up a road map. He has little, if any, idea of what goes into the making of that map. The aerial photographs the students are working with are the first, and in some ways the easiest, step in modern topographical map making. They are only the beginning of the process, yet they require something in the neighborhood of $1 million worth of specialized equipment and training incorporated into this Air Force C-130 on an airstrip in Peru.
Hi, I am Captain Miller. I am a photo aircraft commander on a Lockheed RC-130. This C-130 has been modified by the addition of highly accurate photographic equipment to provide the type of photographs with which modern-day map making begins. The special high-speed cameras within this aircraft enable us to shoot one picture every 45 seconds while flying at speeds up to 300 miles an hour. They can distinguish a ditch or a fence line from altitude of more than 30,000 feet. The strips from our cameras become the basis of the map maker's art, saving not only millions of dollars, but thousands of man-hours of wading rivers, climbing mountains, and hacking through jungles. Here in Peru, due to a strange coincidence, our plane actually made it possible for the cartographers to map a city which no longer existed.
I am Major Lou Prentice, the officer in charge of the IAGS Peru project. This is Colonel Luis Montezuma Delfin, the director of the Instituto Geográfico Militar of Peru. Films of Ron Rayerka, mentioned by Captain Miller, were taken as a regular part of our mapping program just one day prior to the avalanche. Immediately after this catastrophe, the U.S. Air Force returned for another set of photos, giving us the only scientific before and after photography of a glacial landslide ever taken. We can't say that Ron Rayerka was wiped off the map because Ron Rayerka was never on a map in the first place. Although the village was completely obliterated, we were able to determine what was buried beneath the 30 to 60 foot of rock and mud. When the aerial photographs were brought to the Institute, the technicians worked through many laborious processes to the final stages of printing a finished map of Randrayirka. This is possibly the first time that map makers have ever been required to draw a map down to the last building and fence post of a city that no longer exists. We can now estimate the damage. In addition, scientists all over the world can study these documents in an attempt to learn more about the critical point at which an avalanche occurs and the time that it might occur.
Science and modern techniques certainly have advanced the art of map making. For example, Senor Hernandez of Venezuela is using a device called a Kelch plotter to convert a set of aerial photographs into a contour map. The instrument projects images from overlapping pictures onto a drawing table. Colored lights and matching lenses in the glasses he wears give him a three-dimensional image which enables him to begin tracing contours. To complete his job, however, the operator must know the exact altitude and location of 4 points identifiable in his photographs. This is where the sweat and sometimes the adventure comes in.
In the rugged terrain which characterizes most of Latin America, the helicopter has become an almost indispensable tool of the modern surveyor, often carrying him in hours to sites which once could be reached only after days or weeks of back-breaking effort. Places remain, however, whose remoteness defies even the modern aircraft. To reach their destination, this Nicaraguan crew will travel by boat and by foot through the jungle heartland of Central America. The survey party carry in their duffel bags the most modern of scientific mapping equipment, but their living conditions along the route are more rugged than anything encountered by surveyor George Washington on the frontiers of North America 2 centuries ago. Intense heat and tangled undergrowth so thick in places that paths must be carved out with machetes a few feet at a time are handicaps which the surveyor in this part of the world soon learns to take for granted. The traveler in this particular jungle must move with exceptional care, for the tropical forests of Nicaragua contain possibly the most extensive collection of poisonous snakes in the Western Hemisphere. Here is one reason why foot power in some parts of the world still holds its own in competition with air power. The refueling problem is a great deal easier. The blood, sweat, and tears which go into the making of a map are among its most important ingredients, although usually unknown to everyone except the unsung heroes who supply them. This is a leveling party. Their job is to determine the elevations of various key points along the survey route. By taking successive readings on the level rods held by his companions, the observer can determine the relative elevations of all important terrain points in the area. Officer in charge of the Nicaraguan project is Major Jonathan Miner.
Now, every mapping problem doesn't involve a trip like the one that we just finished. There are, however, plenty of them, and enough of them to make the job very interesting. And as Ken Reinhardt said, that much of this mathematical data that we have can be run through or cranked through a cartographer's machine in just no time at all. However, even in the advanced age that we're in these days, the fact remains that sooner or later, a man is going to have to shoulder a tripod and go out into the bush. And as a lot of my people say, IAGS stands for I'm Always Going Somewhere.
These are the Bolivian Andes, and this IAGS crew is 2,300 miles south of Major Miners Group in Nicaragua and 16,000 feet higher up.
I'm Major Art Ellion. I'm in charge of the IAGS Bolivia project. Our climate is different here. Whereas Major Miners' problems are with the heat and the snakes, ours is the cold, and at this altitude in the Andes, the difficulty of getting enough oxygen to keep going. Our basic job, however, is the same. In Bolivia, we have these extensive mountains that we're surveying at this moment. The large population of the country lives on the Altiplano, a plateau at about 13,000 feet, and these beautiful mountains are a barrier. Our maps will permit the construction of roads across these mountains and the movement of these people as colonizers down into the more fertile parts of this country. The IAGS is also helping to create a natural resource in the form of scientific technicians as our work progresses in each country.
This Peruvian officer in his base camp high in the Altiplano of Peru uses the remaining hours of daylight to correlate results of the day's survey with aerial photographs of the area. The job of cartography is one for resourceful, energetic men. In addition to their technical skills, they must bring to their work all the craft of the experienced outdoorsman. In this part of the world, there is often no quartermaster, no mess hall. A survey party often lives off the land on the same food and under the same conditions as the local population. But there are compensations. A life filled with days and weeks in the midst of great scenic beauty, and of many hours spent with men of different backgrounds and unfamiliar customs, with whom are forged those bonds of friendship known only to men who have shared a common, challenging experience. Gravity measuring stations like this one in the Peruvian Andes have been set up and accurate measurements are being taken throughout the hemisphere. The force of gravity varies slightly from place to place on the Earth's surface, and accurate measurements are crucial in the sciences of geodesy and geophysics. It is only through the correlation of scientific investigations such as these throughout the world that a true picture of the size and shape of the Earth can be developed. IAGS also maintains tide gauge stations in 70 coastal locations. These are extremely important in the business of map making, for the elevation of any point on any map is ultimately determined by the average sea level along the sea coast. To determine this level accurately requires a continuous recording of tidal changes for almost 19 years. Tide gauge stations also maintain constant checks on the density and temperature of the local seawater. Such information, while of no value to the mapmaker, is immensely useful to marine biologists and other scientists. Another example of an important byproduct of the IAGS mapping program. High in the Peruvian Andes, so high as to seem part of the sky itself, stand the ruins of the ancient Incan city of Machu Picchu. For centuries, Indian legend maintained that the last of the Incan leaders had escaped capture by the Spanish conquistadores and retreated to a secret city above the clouds. Only in modern times has the legend proved to have a basis in fact, with the discovery of Machu Picchu. Now a favorite tourist's attraction, this legend come to life is just one more target for mapping to a geodetic surveyor. Early travelers seeking the kingdom of the Incas looked not for mountains, but desert. Sail the coast southward. When there are no longer any trees, you are in Peru. Such were the sailing directions given 16th century navigators. While hardly sufficient for the modern geographer, the directions were surprisingly accurate. For beginning in Peru, the seacoast of South America becomes a desert, which is almost without visible plant life for a stretch of over 2,000 miles. Map-making in such almost featureless terrain requires utmost accuracy, since there are so few physical details against which to double-check the observer's findings. The difficulties are somewhat compensated for by the extraordinary visibility which the desert affords. At least here, there is no mile of jungle to be cut down before the observer can get a clear view of his sighting point. The basis of map-making is today much the same as it was in ancient Greece or Egypt. The problem is to determine distances and directions between recognizable points. Technological advances of today, however, have added speed and efficiency to the application of ancient mathematical rules. By means of portable radios, the surveyors can coordinate their efforts over great distances. At each location, the mirrors of a heliotrope provide a sighting point for the theodolites of the other party. Direction or azimuth is controlled by a theodolite, which is used to determine angular measurement. This party is also equipped with a tellurometer, a device which applies electronics to distance measurement and gives direct information which otherwise would require much more laborious geometric calculations. A tellurometer uses the radar principle, sending out a radar impulse which is received at a distant station and returned. Measurement of the time required for the round trip and knowledge of the speed of the radar impulse permit computation of the distance. It looks simple, but in practice, according to one IAGS engineer, surveying is half mathematics and half endurance. The training of technicians in the field of mapmaking is as important a part of the IAGS mission as the maps themselves. With the bulk of the work being done by citizens of the collaborating countries, the result will be a legacy of scientifically trained manpower, which may have a profound effect on the future economic development of the hemisphere. And while laying the groundwork for future development of their own country's resources, such technicians are contributing to the expanding body of the world's scientific knowledge. The mapmaker's art takes him wherever the science of cartography dictates. It is not always desert or the jungle. It may take him, for instance, through the heart of Lima, one of the great cities of the Western Hemisphere. Here the surveyor sometimes feels more like a movie star than a cartographer. And there are those who have been known to prefer the privacy of mountain, jungle, or desert. So far, we have seen just a few of the major efforts which go into that impressive-looking map you find in your atlas. But locations on a map have names. Somebody has to put them there. And that can be quite an adventure in itself. This job falls to a man known as a field classifier. The field classifier is part explorer, part cartographer, part detective, and part linguist. He must not only determine the local name for the islands, villages, or waterways which appear on his map, but frequently decide such matters as the appropriate spelling for a designation furnished by a native who has no written language. The field classifier is not the final judge of this nomenclature, which may require months of study and debate by learned scholars in the country involved. But it is his responsibility to give them alternatives from which to choose, and he usually finds it an interesting job.
A ver, los cerros que están allá enfrente, el más alto, ¿cómo se llama?
Ñaña.
¿Y este que está más acá a la izquierda?
Es el cerro de Morón.
¿Y el puntón de allá qué nombre tiene?
Chaclacayo.
Chaclacayo. ¿Están seguros?
Sí.
¿No se llama Ñaña el de allá?
No.
No report on the Inter-American Geodetic Survey could be complete without a very special mention of the 937th Engineer Company, a group of Army aviation pilots who routinely perform one of the most adventurous jobs in flying today. The tools of their trade are 42 aircraft, including 16 helicopters. The pilots, many of whom are members of Corps of Engineers, not only fly technicians in and out of some of the most inaccessible locations in the world, but frequently assist in the technical jobs of map making. Pilots of the 937, flying at low altitudes over unexplored terrain, are among the last of the real bush pilots. Ironically, for men who are part of the largest mapping enterprise ever undertaken, their job is made especially hazardous by the fact that where they fly, there are no reliable maps. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. It would be hard to exaggerate the role of the modern helicopter in the work of men who must go to remote places and survive there long enough to do a job. And the job required for an accurate, detailed topographic map is far more exacting than anything which goes into the simple road map with which most people are familiar. Few are aware of how much of the Earth's surface, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, remains as much terra incognito as it was when Columbus set sail for the New World. The time is now in sight when doubt and uncertainty can be replaced by scientific knowledge. This achievement will owe a large debt not only to cartographers, but to the versatility of Army aircraft and to the Army aviators who pilot them.
Because IAGS aircraft are often the only light aircraft available in the interior, they are frequently called upon to perform mercy missions. Their record of service in time of national and personal disaster is second to none. The important thing to remember about our program is that we are not mapping Latin America. We are merely assisting the 16 Latin American countries in mapping their own national territory. We lend them equipment, we train their people, and we give them technical advice. But it's their program. The demand for large-scale maps is increasing every day. They are needed for the construction of their roads, building their power projects, colonization projects, and for the inventory of their natural resources. We are assisting the Agency for International Development in this program. IAGS has been supporting mapping operations in Latin America since 1946. During this time, our officers, our engineers, and our pilots have been working day in, day out with their Latin American counterparts. It is hard to imagine any program which has promoted more goodwill and understanding between the citizens of the United States and our friendly neighbors in Latin America.
An anti-guerrilla raid in Vietnam. There is danger here, danger and discomfort, and sometimes death. There are also Americans here, not to fight, but to observe. A soldier is trained to command, but there are times and places where all he can do is advise. Such a place is the Republic of Vietnam, where the American military advisor is expected to observe, draw conclusions, and give counsel. He may also teach and be a useful friend. What he teaches is the soldier's art. He brings with him years of training in the armed forces of the United States, and because he has been specially selected for his work, a personal aptitude for diplomacy. He also brings courage. For those attempting to destroy this young republic in Southeast Asia are well aware of the role played by such advisors in frustrating the attempt at subversion. The American advisor in Vietnam has no immunity from terrorist bullets. Such are the conditions under which he works. This is the story of what he does. This is United States Army Captain William R. Johnston. A native of Michigan with a wife and 2 children in Chicago, he is seen here within a few days of his arrival in Vietnam. For the next 12 months, he will be official U.S. advisor to the 1st Battalion, 11th Regiment, 7th Infantry Division of the Army of Vietnam. In particular, he will work with Vietnamese Captain Tran Chen Cang. His success or failure will depend in large part on the kind of personal relationships he is able to establish. The job will be a little easier because, as part of our military assistance program, Captain Kang has already received training in infantry and artillery tactics in the United States. At the moment, he knows more about the traditions and customs of Captain Johnston's people than the captain knows of his. The success of any military advisor depends on his ability to grasp the historical background, the customs and conventions of the people he is sent to advise. Unless he develops for them a thorough and sympathetic knowledge, his technical military skills will prove useless. Before he can function efficiently, the advisor must gain a thorough knowledge of the human material he has to work with, the men he will try to help make into still better soldiers. When Captain Johnston joins his battalion, it is stationed at a sugar mill located in the Mekong Delta. a region notorious as a center of guerrilla terrorism. The mill is the chief source of sugar, rum, and molasses for the whole Republic of Vietnam. The 1st Battalion is here to provide security for the mill and to prevent Viet Cong, communist guerrillas, from extorting a tax on farmers trying to bring in sugarcane. It is the nature of war in Vietnam that the ordinary affairs of business and commerce must often be conducted in an atmosphere of an armed camp. Advisor Johnston begins by learning, both from Captain Kong and Sergeant Dak, a former schoolteacher who serves as interpreter. One of the first things Johnston learns is the difficulty of identifying the enemy. In an area largely controlled by the Viet Cong, it is estimated that fully 1/3 of the mill's employees are themselves part-time guerrillas, operating at night to terrorize the surrounding countryside. Some things an advisor can do immediately. An artillery emplacement is an artillery emplacement. A well-trained officer can offer a number of suggestions for increasing the effectiveness of the battalion's howitzers. He can also suggest that troops in garrison need not settle for shelters improvised from ponchos when their own labor could supply semi-permanent barracks. But for the larger problems, those which typify the undeclared war being waged against the whole of South Vietnam, there are no quick solutions. How, for instance, do you defend endless miles of exposed road between the sugar mill and its major market, the capital city of Saigon? Any morning, word may arrive that in the darkness of night, guerrilla bands have sabotaged the road, making it impassable. Officers and advisor can investigate, summon troops, but their chances of accomplishing much are slight. With miles of jungle into which they can vanish at will, the guerrillas responsible for the sabotage are as elusive as field mice. In the rice paddies and bamboo thickets of the Mekong, odds favor the guerrilla. Aware that attempts to intercept his retreat into the sheltering jungle will be almost impossible, the guerrilla adopts as his motto the adage that he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. The guerrillas vanish, leaving only civilians protesting ignorance of the whole affair. With the guerrillas driven off or underground, it remains to repair the damage, a job which falls to civilians from the area recruited by the government's district chief. Here is a poignant example of the irony and the tragedy of Vietnam. For many of these same villagers have undoubtedly spent the long night under the menacing guns of guerrillas, digging the same holes they must now refill. Destroy its transportation, and you threaten the life of a nation. A modern nation, like the ancient Roman Empire, cannot long survive if her people and her commerce are denied roads and highways on which to travel. Much of the struggle in Vietnam has become a ceaseless effort by guerrillas to close the highways, and by the government to keep them open. Like others, Johnston is well aware that there will be no real security until the guerrilla can be denied free movement through the jungle. Nor is there any reason why government troops should not take a leaf from the guerrillas' book, stationing themselves in the jungle for a nighttime ambush. There is an obvious need for regular, aggressive night patrols throughout the area. But such tactics run counter to those taught Vietnamese troops for more than a century, based on the venerable military maxim, attack by day, by night defend. At considerable personal risk, Captain Johnston demonstrates the effectiveness of night patrols by accompanying them himself. Eventually, they become part of the battalion's standard procedure. This, too, has become standard procedure. American helicopters have brought mobility to Vietnamese troops in their efforts to pin down guerrilla bands before they can achieve their customary disappearing act. The helicopters are flown by U.S. Army pilots. Part of the U.S. advisor's job is to coordinate the helicopter elements with the Vietnamese troops whom they carry and will do the fighting. From the air, hidden way stations along the guerrilla supply route are found and destroyed. A communist propaganda booth is discovered and destroyed by Johnston's battalion and a local village self-defense corps. Such mobility can be effective. The test is the death or capture of hardcore guerrillas. In any engagement, many of the guerrillas will prove to be half-trained, propaganda-indoctrinated villagers or farmers. The real prizes are the professionals who do the training and the propagandizing. Men like these, long sought by the government as known professional terrorists. It is also an American advisor's responsibility to help get armor support for his unit. These armored personnel carriers have been brought in at the request of Captain Johnston to assist the 1st Battalion in an anti-guerrilla sweep of its area of the Mekong Delta. In such terrain, the effort to uncover even a single guerrilla is so great that one observer has compared it to a $1,000 bill chasing 10 cents around a rice paddy. The situation is inevitable, however, until the initiative is seized once and for all from the Viet Cong. Until then, every resource of equipment, tactics, and strategy must be brought to bear on the problem. It is an advisor's job to make his counterpart aware of what is available. Encourage him to use his artillery, his engineers, his communications, his ordnance, his medical facilities, and to coordinate his efforts with other services. Since the battalion to which Advisor Johnston was assigned has the primary mission of defending a guerrilla-infested area, the captain finds himself helping to train men who have already known months, and in some cases years, of combat. Because no one can predict when a training exercise might suddenly become the real thing, classes are conducted with loaded weapons. No matter what the difficulties, no matter how blooded by combat they may be, troops must be continuously retrained if they are to win victory in war. With training comes success. Without it, disaster. The Vietnamese is potentially an excellent soldier. He has intelligence, agility, and courage. Properly trained and motivated, he can become one of the best fighting men in Asia. To encourage adequate training in the military arts and science is perhaps the most important job of the American military advisor in Vietnam or anywhere else. Captain Johnston teaches by demonstration as well as by lecture. Here he lays wire for a demonstration of the Claymore anti-personnel mine, while his interpreter explains the function of the mine from notes prepared for him by Captain Johnston. While teaching technique to the men, Johnston is also communicating, by example, a subtle message to their commanders. There is nothing wrong about getting your own hands dirty to accomplish a job. The anti-personnel mine has great potential for the war in Vietnam. Used properly, it can have devastating effect on the night-traveling bands of guerrillas. It is an advisor's job to get such equipment into use by increasing the number of Vietnamese officers and troops who know how to use it. Early January. With 2/3 of his Vietnamese tour behind him, military advisor Bill Johnston accompanies the battalion to participate with other units of the regiment in the fortification of a native village. It is the battalion's responsibility to provide from their own supply stores a large portion of the food, medicine, and household goods necessary to set up whole families of Vietnamese whose menfolk belong to the Self-Defense Corps which will defend the village. It is, on the Buddhist calendar, the year of the tiger. Somehow this seems appropriate. With the captain's own tour nearing its end, he is joined by First Lieutenant Joe Clement of Atlanta, Georgia, who may ultimately be his replacement. Lieutenant Clement has 4 months to learn his way around. He'll need them. So will Master Sergeant Jones of Baltimore, the battalion's first enlisted advisor. The object of this program is to draw together residents of tiny villages scattered throughout the area and relocate them in larger communities which can be fortified to resist roving bands of guerrillas. The troops are here mainly to guard workers during the construction. Protection must also be furnished for laborers on a nearby road project. Shortest route between the village and the capital at Saigon, the road was rendered useless by Viet Cong saboteurs more than 4 years ago. It must now be put back into use, and somehow kept that way. Reconstruction is accomplished by Vietnamese Army engineers. Assistance is also rendered by local civilians recruited by the district chief. Captain Johnston, speaking for the infantry, consults with other U.S. advisors attached to the engineer units. In Vietnam, the main arteries of travel and commerce are not concrete, but water. Vietnam's many rivers and networks of canals have been for centuries the key to the nation's economy. These, too, must be kept open, free from guerrilla harassment. While less permanent damage can be inflicted on such a waterway, everyone travels in peril of sudden ambush from the surrounding jungle. It should be said that part of an advisor's job is to acquaint himself with the ordinary citizens of the country to which he is assigned. On occasion, advisors may assist other agencies in the distribution of books, pamphlets, or school supplies. But their main concern is directly military. On this occasion, for example, Johnston has recommended the movement of men and materials from battalion headquarters downriver to a key site in the Delta Canal system. There, Self-Defense Corps volunteers can protect farmers trying to get their produce to market, putting an end to systematic Viet Cong extortion reported from that area. On the advisor's recommendation, troops are sent ashore to dig in and secure the area before barges are landed. Failure to take such precautions in the past has resulted in serious and unnecessary losses. For, as Captain Johnston points out to the regimental commander, the Viet Cong will attack by day if the stakes are high enough, and there are ample clues to the presence of guerrillas in the area. With the area reasonably secure, the first craft, an American LCM, can be signaled to come in. Following plans drawn up jointly by Captain Johnston and Captain Cong, the battalion begins construction of fortifications for a native village, their purpose in making the trip. A triangular wall is built with mud. Dry, it will be almost as hard as concrete and a good deal easier to come by. So far as possible, building materials are collected locally. Captain Cong personally supervises most phases of the construction, something he might not have done a few months earlier. Johnston's presence has had its effect. In the background can be seen smoke from fires started to clear the brush from the surrounding area, depriving guerrillas of concealment near the outpost. At each angle formed by the mud triangle, a blockhouse is constructed. A wide moat is dug around the entire post, reminiscent of the Middle Ages, but highly effective against guerrillas. Inevitably, there is a casualty. A Self-Defense Corps man dropped by a single bullet from an unseen sniper. Johnston radios a request for helicopter evacuation, hoping to get the wounded man to a hospital in time to save his life. Maximum care for wounded in the field is something any American advisor can be expected to stress, and is in sharp contrast to Viet Cong treatment of their own wounded. The lesson is not lost on Vietnamese troops. Fortifications nearly completed, the battalion starts to move a bulldozer across the canal, on the other side of which it intends to build a watchtower. And now, mud, recently so useful, becomes a king-size nuisance. With an unknown number of Viet Cong in the area waiting for just such an opportunity, this delay could prove a serious matter. Either the bulldozer will be pulled out before their plight is discovered, or the battalion can expect to lose both its equipment and a good many lives. Finally, the mission is completed. The fortifications have been built. The Self-Defense Corps men, their families, and villagers move in, bringing firewood for cooking and drinkable water. A scene of domestic tranquility against a backdrop of anticipated violence. The village fortifications built and men in place to defend it, the battalion heads for home. It arrives with a few unfriendly companions, Viet Cong guerrillas encountered on the way home. The battalion has done its job well, returning home in good order with a minimum of casualties. Good news. But for Captain Johnston, the real news is that he, too, is going home. His year is up, and there are those 2 kids and wife back in Chicago. Yet in parting, there is also regret. Johnston and the men of the 1st Battalion have shared much together, have suffered much together in ways that only they can fully understand. He leaves behind many good friends. But he leaves behind someone else as well, his successor, Lieutenant Clement, who for the next year will be the battalion's new American advisor. What Johnston learned, Clement now knows. Within the guidelines laid down by U.S. policy, the lieutenant must now seek to further in his own way what was begun by Captain Johnston and his predecessor. There will be problems, and he knows it. But the new advisor has more to build on than did Captain Johnston, as, a year or so from now, the American who comes after Lieutenant Clement will have more than he. So it will be until peace finally comes to this beleaguered republic. A peace for which the Army advisor in Vietnam will be in no small part responsible.
When a man sets out to be a soldier, he hopes to accomplish many things. He wants to serve his country. He wants to carve out a career for himself. He wants to see something of the world. He wants excitement, a challenge. He wants to prove himself a man.
All right, hit it! I think I've accomplished all of this. I've got my campaign ribbons and my sergeant stripes. I've served on 3 continents and been in 15 foreign countries. I've had interesting assignments. I've worked with top-notch people. I've been given more responsibility than I'd have dreamed possible. I've had a lot of satisfaction out of being a soldier. And I think I've been a good one. One thing I'm positive of, in my 14 years in the Army, I've never had a more satisfying job than I have now. As a drill sergeant. A year ago, I didn't know what a drill sergeant was. I was sitting in a PX in Kaiserslautern, Germany, wondering where the Army was going to send me next.
It was then that the Army's new drill sergeant program was just getting underway. The drill sergeant concept came about following a directive from the Secretary of the Army to U.S. CONARC, Continental Army Command. His orders were to revitalize Army training, and in particular, basic combat training.
There's no doubt that our analysis has proved that the basic combat training program can best be revitalized by the assignment of more and better sergeant instructors at the lowest possible level. This new basic combat training program shows much promise. As you know,
through the Office of Director of Individual Training, CONARC re-evaluated its own methods.
Effective, good, well-motivated combat soldiers. The assignment of additional or more sergeant instructors with their hour-to-hour and day-to-day contact with the basic combat trainees will produce more effective soldiers who have a better attitude towards the Army.
CONARC's research revealed that the early attitude formed by recruits influenced their entire Army career. Soldiers who had a positive attitude toward the Army generally looked back favorably on basic training. So a very simple hypothesis suggested itself. If you could improve the basic training environment, you could improve the performance of the entire Army. For the recruit of today is the frontline soldier of tomorrow. The decision was to change from a system of centralized training committees to unit-level instruction, which is considered the prime recruit training level. And to provide the personal contact needed, CONARC created the role of drill sergeant. The man underneath the broad-brimmed campaign hat became the heart of the new system. The best non-coms in the Army were needed for this program, and CONARC set out to attract them.
When my CO in Germany said he was recommending me for drill sergeant school, I didn't know what to think.
Met them all, and I'm sure you'll find the standards very high. As you know, the higher the standards, the better the reward. And the Department of the Army doesn't expect you to get out there and put out all of this effort without some rewards, some of which will be free laundry, issue of extra uniforms, and it is a stabilized tour, which will mean something to you as a family man.
Sounds real good, sir.
And another advantage is the promotions. There's additional promotions looking out for the drill sergeants, and this will probably offer one of the biggest challenges to your personal leadership that you've ever experienced.
When I returned to the States, I was assigned to drill sergeant school, one of just 6 in the whole country.
Good morning, men. Welcome to Drill Sergeant School. You're all top soldiers or you wouldn't be here. A lot of you have been in the Army and in charge of troops for a long time. Many of you have been away from the basic fundamentals for a long time and are rusty on the finer points of training recruits. Is that correct?
As far as the Army is concerned, there is only one correct method to conduct dismounted drill. To give PT. To mount guard. At the Drill Sergeant School, they review every subject taught in basic combat training. They study concepts of leadership and motivation, and most important of all, every student is taught to be an instructor.
The complete nomenclature of this weapon, the M14 rifle, is shown on this chart. Later on, you will learn to disassemble and assemble this weapon. The M14 is magazine-fed, air-cooled.
It is also a requirement of the new program that all officer personnel assigned to basic training regiments be similarly indoctrinated. At each of the 6 drill sergeant schools, there is a short course for company grade officers.
In order to indicate to you the magnitude of your responsibilities and the need for superior training, I want you to note
Lieutenant colonels and above, who are assigned to Army training centers, are required to attend a 3-day senior officers orientation at Fort Monroe, Virginia.
Members of the Reserve Enlisted Program. After 4 months in one of your training centers, receiving basic combat or advanced individual training, approximately 212,000 of these young soldiers enter the replacement stream to supply Army commands worldwide. The remaining 145,000 return to their parent Reserve or National Guard units. Truly, your training centers represent the heart that pumps the lifeblood to the Army's ready forces.
Upon completion of the required 6-week course, new drill sergeants are authorized to don their distinctive campaign hat.
First class Royce. Sergeant First Class Stout.
Another milestone in their professional military careers, and another moment of pride to be shared by their families and friends. The new drill sergeants are assigned to a basic training company at one of the Army's basic combat training centers.
Gentlemen, you know that the degree of proficiency that each trainee attains during his 8 weeks of basic training here depends primarily on how well each of you do your jobs as drill instructors. Now, we have been discussing the training program for our 2nd week of basic training, and I'm sure that each of you know your individual responsibilities. Now, do you have any questions?
Sir, in reference to Thursday's noon meal, will we eat it on the range or will we truck back to the company and have dinner in the mess hall?
Thursday's meal?
Yes, sir.
We will eat the Thursday noon meal at the range, and then we will march back. And I plan on departing the range approximately 1,300 hours. Are there any other questions? Mr. Holmes, you're dismissed.
I was as nervous as a recruit myself those first few weeks with my new company, but I remembered what they had taught me in drill sergeant school. And as I began to learn more about the recruits in my platoon, I began to see more ways in which I could help them get off to a better start on their Army careers.
For the more than 350,000 young men who enter the Army each year, basic combat training is a period of transition from civilian to military life, a difficult period for many. But whether they are volunteers, inductees, or reservists, in for just 6 months. The Army is genuinely concerned with each of them as individuals, about their health, about the cut of their uniforms, and about the type of Army career they are best suited for. Although they are younger, recruits today are bigger, healthier, better educated, usually with high school certificates, and more carefully selected than ever before.
Do you have a driver's license?
Yes.
Your date of birth is 20 December 42?
Yes.
You're single?
Yes.
No dependents?
No.
Do you wear glasses?
No.
What did you do in your civilian life? What was your main civilian occupation?
Farmer.
You were a farmer?
Mm-hmm.
Did you operate any machinery?
Yes.
Elevators?
Yes.
Large trucks?
No
Any
large
vehicles?
trucks, but large tractors.
Did you operate small vehicles, such as a pickup truck? Or
Yes.
would you like to be a light vehicle driver?
Yes, I would.
You would.
Beginning at the reception station and continuing to the time they complete basic combat training 8 weeks later, they are under the constant guidance and supervision of their drill sergeant. His job is to teach soldiering. In fact, he gives the recruit the majority of instruction received in basic combat training. He teaches them the new method of hand-to-hand combat, a combination of judo, karate, and old-fashioned street fighting. It's more deadly because it utilizes a man's natural reaction to kick or strike when under attack. There are 12 drill sergeants assigned to each company, 3 to a platoon.
We get to know these soldiers pretty well, each one. We ought to. We're with them from dawn to dusk every hour of the training day. After hours, we're available for consultation, too. This isn't the kind of a job you can walk away from when retreat sounds. I guess you might say that we're a combination instructor, advisor, friend, big brother, training specialist, and even father confessor. We have a responsibility to see that each and every one of these recruits gets through, no matter what his problems are. We feel that if a recruit has difficulty, it's not that he failed to learn, it's that we failed to teach. That's why we keep a close watch on our platoon and help each man all we can.
Yes, sir. All right, good. We're having a little bit of trouble with this written test. Now, I want you to go over a few of these questions and answers for me here. All right, I'd like you to read those questions now and the answers to me.
But sometimes a recruit just needs more instructions. If this is the case, we recommend that he be recycled. That is, put back a week or two.
That's correct. That's good. All right, read the second one now.
Time is the crucial factor in training today.
D, if you are now or were at any time, it was awarded.
That's correct. All right, read the third one now.
3, the hint.
There are still some people who have this mental picture of Army basic training, as it was in World War I. Or World War II. G.I. Joe had 13 weeks or more of basic then. Today, there's a new look to basic combat training. To accommodate shorter periods of military service, the Army has streamlined the course to 8 weeks. That leaves only 44 training days to turn a raw recruit into a fighting man. Just 352 hours to make a soldier. For example, there are just 12 hours for bayonet, 4 hours for grenade, 8 hours for first aid, and 3 hours for military courtesy and customs. He must also be made familiar with such things as night firing, individual camouflage, and new methods of protection against chemical, biological, radiological warfare. The objective of basic combat training is to develop a disciplined, highly motivated soldier who is qualified in his basic weapon, physically conditioned, and drilled in the fundamentals of soldiery.
Today's recruit needs incentives, just as there are incentives for us to become drill sergeants. This is one, our honor board. We use it to stimulate rivalry between the different companies in our battalion. The competition gets pretty spirited. There's individual competition, too, such as in pugil stick training. This is one place a man gets a chance to use his full strength against an opponent. Other incentives are the rifle marksmanship awards, especially the sharpshooter and expert medals. Every recruit wants to be a hotshot with a rifle.
On the 25-meter range, the recruit learns the fundamentals of the M14 rifle. How to aim it. How to zero it in. How to fire it from the basic shooting positions. The second week of range work is devoted to basic rifle marksmanship. The new system substitutes realistic silhouette targets for the old conventional bullseyes. Finally, the recruit is ready to fire for record. Targets pop up at ranges of from 50 to 350 meters. To qualify as a marksman and pass basic training, he must hit a total of 30 or more targets out of 84. 45 hits make him a sharpshooter, 60 an expert.
In our company of 235 men, we had 108 sharpshooters and 12 experts. Only 3 men failed to qualify. And after a little more help, they made it too. That's pretty good shooting. We like to think that our personal coaching helps the men score better. Our boys did well on their PCPT too.
The PCPT, or Physical Combat Proficiency Test, is part of a standardized series of tests given at the end of each training cycle.
is a mile run against time. 5:20 in combat boots is a pretty fast mile. Along with physical training, the recruit is tested on every military subject taught during basic combat training. However, if he fails to achieve the minimum score, he is dropped back for additional training and retesting. In the Army, this is called recycling. If he does extra well, he may be one of the top 20% in each company eligible for immediate promotion and an increase in pay. Another challenge to the recruit is the week he spends on bivouac and on the combat courses. Under safe, controlled conditions, he gets a first-hand feel of what combat is like. For, as a former chief of staff said, the Army no longer has time for combat shakedowns. When we go today, we could go shooting.
When that first 8-week cycle came to an end, it felt sort of lonely. We had a good bunch in our platoon. And I remembered all of them. I remembered the ones who were always first in line for chow. The ones who ran into personal problems. I remember the few who got sick. I remember the one who didn't make it. I also remembered the fun my gang had whenever there was a few minutes for relaxation. I remembered seeing them on Saturdays. And on Sundays. I remembered how young they looked that first day. I remembered how proud I was of them yesterday at the graduation review, and how proud they were of themselves. ready to go on to advanced training. My job was done. But tomorrow, a new job begins.
The drill sergeant's job is a job being well done, according to this paragraph taken from a letter written and signed by an entire platoon of former recruits.
This is a moment in time that may never come. The telephone won't be answered. Nobody's home. Not here, or here, or here. Not many hours ago, these streets were alive with people and sound. Now there is silence, the loud absence of sound that follows a total evacuation. This is the geographical center of the evacuated area. At the bottom of that hole in the ground is an enemy nuclear device, a bomb. It was intended for a target some miles distant, but a malfunction delivered it here. Perhaps it was a second malfunction that prevented detonation. But it is also possible that a time delay fuse is still working perfectly. Either way, this is now a potential ground zero. From now on, it becomes a guessing game. Will it go off, and if so, when? How long? A day? Hours? Minutes? Seconds? We don't know the answers, and neither do these men. They do know the destructive capabilities of nuclear weapons. And they do know that survival and safety exist only miles from where they're standing. But with these soldiers, the instinct for self-preservation is not an individual matter. Their efforts are directed toward preserving property and other lives. And in the process, they must invariably gamble with their own. And at best, it is always a gamble. They come equipped with knowledge, with intelligence, with experience, and with highly developed skills. There's a good chance they can pull the enemy bomb's nuclear teeth, render it safe, if the malfunction doesn't suddenly correct itself, if it isn't timed to go off too soon, if it doesn't detonate before they've had a chance to test their talents on it. At best, it will be a gamble, but they'll take it. We've been looking ahead in time to a moment that hopefully may never arrive. It could happen in the future. It may happen in the future. As of this moment, however, what we have been looking at is pure fiction. But it is a fact that there are men like these. And it is a fact that they are ready and willing to take such chances, to risk their lives almost every day of the week. This story has roots that extend back centuries in time. It begins with an invention. Then to a chemical discovery, a little imagination is added. A device has been created. A device which delivers the first man-made explosion. But there is also the ever-present element of imperfection. And imperfection breeds a new problem: uncertainty. It is a problem that grows with the passing centuries, expanding slowly at first, and then in the mid-1900s, demanding action by announcing itself with explosive fury. Early in September 1940, during World War II, many of the bombs dropped on London were duds, and many contained something which added a new sophistication to terror: the delayed action fuse, timed to detonate anywhere from 1 to 80 hours after impact. By late September, there were over 3,000 unexploded bombs buried in metropolitan London, and the threat of sudden death and destruction which was posed by these unexploded bombs provided the military with its first clear view of the extent of a problem of the aftermath of military action, a deadly heritage of explosive devices that for one reason or another failed to detonate. This threat must be neutralized. It is a job which must be done by men in uniform, who have to be nothing less than experts. EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal.
I volunteer for explosive ordnance disposal duties and training for such duties. I realize and fully understand that this duty is hazardous and involves the use and disposal of explosives, including materials that may be highly volatile or radioactive. Explosive Ordnance Disposal. EOD. The United States Army officer or enlisted man who signs this paper must be above average in intelligence. He must not be unduly allergic to high explosives. He must qualify for a top-secret security clearance, and he must be in perfect mental and physical condition. A good brain, steady nerves, a strong back, and a willingness to risk all three. If he can muster this combination of assets, he gets to sign this volunteer statement, and his story begins. We'll meet him first in the state of Maryland, at a place called Indian Head. He is about to become part of a student body that wears a variety of uniforms. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. All EOD volunteers come to Indian Head, for this is a unique, highly specialized installation. Inside this building, which is part of the United States Navy's Explosive Ordnance Disposal School, the EOD volunteer begins the process of learning his trade. His subject for today and for each and every day of his future life in EOD is explosive ordnance. An estimated total of well over 50,000 different destructive devices are now, potentially, his personal business. Devices big and small, simple and sophisticated, seemingly innocuous
but actually deadly. The range is vast, from a blasting cap to an artillery shell, a hand grenade to an aerial bomb, a mortar shell to a landmine, a rocket to a guided missile, a stick of dynamite to a nuclear weapon. And since he will be working not with these devices, but against them, he has no choice but to become an expert on his subject. In its early stages, the process of becoming an EOD expert is simply a matter of teaching the student every category of explosive ordnance with which he may someday come in contact. He must know what they are made of, how they work, and above all, how he can stop them from working. He must absorb facts about 1,001 different explosive devices. And 1,001 different methods by which they are made to detonate. Fuses, mechanical, chemical, electrical. Instantaneous and delayed action. Fuses activated by impact, by magnetic fields, by sounds, by vibration, by heat, by light. And fuses activated by a disturbance as slight as the approaching footsteps of an EOD man. Explosive ordnance, when the EOD man gets to it, rarely carries a clear, easy-to-read label. This adds another mandatory prerequisite for EOD work, an excellent memory.
Captain, can you tell me about this item?
This is a 155 millimeter howitzer with a VT fuse.
How about you, Sergeant Boylan? Can you name this round?
90 millimeter heat round with a PIBD fuse.
What about this one, Seaman Smith?
A 75 millimeter HEP round with a base fuse.
Lieutenant Lewis?
A 122 millimeter Soviet mortar, HE with a PD fuse.
Sergeant Clark?
A 3-inch HVAP without fuse.
Sergeant Cleary?
4.2 HE mortar with a PD fuse.
His memory must be quick, it must be accurate, and it must be capable of storing an abundance of entries. This is Stumpneck, another part of the EOD school. We're still in Maryland, but not in the immediate vicinity of any sign of civilization. It is here at Stumpneck that the student receives his first practical taste of actual explosive ordnance disposal. You might say that it is here that he really meets the bomb. For known or unknown reasons, it has failed to detonate, and that makes it his business. This exercise, part of a period of practical training, allows the student to try the most common method of disposal, which is to detonate the bomb. Destroy it in place. This method involves the usual hazards of handling high explosives, but is not particularly delicate or tricky. Why then so cautious? Because it's a dud, and duds are unpredictable. A slight jar could activate its fuse. And even without external prompting, there is always the possibility that a malfunction could suddenly correct itself. Remote, unlikely, improbable, but still a possibility. The one dubious consolation is that should the unexpected detonation take place, he will never hear the explosion. The practical training phase continues. A prediction of future duties in the field. Occasions when success will be more difficult to come by. Occasions when the hard labor of excavation work is only a prelude, a relatively easy and uncomplicated first step. This exercise anticipates such an occasion. It assumes that there are critical installations in the vicinity, making deliberate detonation impossible, leaving the EOD officer in charge with just one alternative: He must now perform what is called a render-safe procedure, and it is now that his work becomes extremely delicate, decidedly tricky, particularly hazardous. In any render-safe operation, much depends upon environment, the conditions under which the device is found. What render-safe procedure will he follow? A recommended one or possibly a new one, devised on the spot, necessitated by some new unforeseen circumstance? He makes the final evaluation, the final choice. The decision, the responsibility, the authority, and the one life that will inevitably be lost if failure results are all his.
A render-safe procedure is a recommended method or technique for disarming a particular device or type of device. There are many such procedures for use against explosive ordnance of the United States and our allies, and, where possible, against foreign ordnance. Sometimes it's a matter of removing the explosive filler. Sometimes it's a matter of deactivating the item by removing the fuse, by stopping it, by disabling it, by countless methods. We won't be seeing any render-safe procedures. They're all classified, and with good reason. If the procedure applies to one of our weapons, it is information we do not wish to provide for a potential enemy. If it applies to weapons used against us, it is usable only so long as the enemy doesn't know about it. If he learns just how we are rendering his weapon safe, then he can easily make one or two simple changes. And a render-safe procedure becomes certain death for the next EOD man who tries to utilize it. There are many render-safe procedures, all theoretically sound and utilizing many ingenious tools and devices. But no procedure is mandatory. They can only be recommended as the best method known. A study of the render-safe requirements is made by an EOD research and development team under the direction of the United States Army Munitions Command. This study is conducted during the development of new weapons, and therefore can avoid the need of a special set of render-safe tools and procedures for each new weapon. During development, great emphasis is placed on standardizing render-safe tools and the recommended procedures. This building houses the Schools Division 6, which offers an intensive 6-week training session. Here, the EOD man is prepared for what might well be his ultimate assignment, for the subject is NWD, Nuclear Weapons Disposal. Now he has completed 19 weeks of highly technical training, including NWD, and he is no longer a student. He is a soldier who has demonstrated that he is mentally, physically, and psychologically equipped to handle a job the Army classifies as hazardous. He is now ready for a field assignment, ready for EOD field duty. The EOD field detachment consists of 9 enlisted men and 1 officer. There are a number of such detachments in the continental United States and overseas. Every man in the detachment has been through the Navy School in Maryland, and each is a fully qualified EOD technician. Each detachment is, in every positive sense of the word, a team. One of the reasons men volunteer for EOD is to escape the monotony of routine work. But routine, even in EOD, is unavoidable. There are reports to be made, and there is equipment to be maintained. The tools of the EOD trade are many and varied. A detachment's equipment storage room packs everything from a screwdriver to radiation detection instruments, and all must be kept in perfect working order. Standardization of render-safe tools keeps to a minimum the amount of special equipment that must be on hand and avoids the confusion of having a specialized tool for each weapon. Also routine, but of great importance to our national defense, are training sessions offered to civil defense and local police personnel. They are taught explosive ordnance reconnaissance, how to locate, identify, and evaluate unexploded ordnance. Over 100,000 people have been trained by Army EOD personnel, and the number is increasing daily. If the need ever arises, they will constitute a civilian army that may well save thousands of lives. This, too, is routine EOD work. The disposal of highly volatile rocket fuel. Hazardous, certainly, but nonetheless, it qualifies as routine. A day-to-day job. A regular, repeated procedure. Another routine is the standby alert. This occurs whenever nuclear weapons are escorted in or through the detachment's area. Rigid safety measures make an accidental nuclear explosion as unlikely as a cosmic collision. But should a rail accident or any other transportation disaster involving nuclear weapons occur, the EOD team would still be left with the problem of rendering the weapon's conventional high explosive charges safe and of safeguarding the nuclear materials. Even in EOD work, routine exists, but it can be shattered quickly by a telephone call. On the other end of the line, an incident is being reported. The discovery of an unexploded device that is threatening lives and property. What it is, where it is, we cannot predict. We can visualize some of the possibilities, though, by referring to EOD files of past incidents. It might be a recurrence of an incident like this one. A group of children playing with an object which is being used as a toy bomb. The object they are struggling over is a 37-millimeter World War I shell. Fortunately, the shell's existence was reported to local authorities and it found its way into the hands of an EOD officer. It's harmless now because the officer removed the charge of explosive that he found in it. Misguided souvenir hunters contribute quite a bit to keeping the EOD man's job free of routine. A 5-inch shell found in a nursing home. A 155-millimeter howitzer projectile found near a housing development. A Japanese 70-millimeter high-explosive mortar shell. A Japanese hand grenade. A 20-millimeter projectile. And then we have the 5 landmines that were picked up at low tide near a power and light company plant. The 3 blocks of explosives found in a private home. The 75 pounds of assorted detonators. And so on. We can round out the picture by adding the bomb that was reported to be ticking away in the basement of a supermarket, but turned out to be a quite harmless can of fermented fruit juice. And the century-old Civil War cannonball, which was displayed in the Federal Hall National Memorial on Wall Street in New York City, which turned out to contain a very live charge of black powder. And this is it, minus the black powder which was removed by EOD men. This is a typical workload. The ordnance items handled by one EOD detachment in the course of 1 year of operation. 146 blasting caps, 500 small arms cartridges, 61 sticks of dynamite, 1 rifle grenade, 35 flares, 2 bombs, 10 rockets, 43 grenades, numerous Civil War items, and 44 artillery projectiles. And during the year, the same EOD unit was also called on 87 bomb scares. Incidentally, these incidents took place in and around Washington, D.C. There are 863 items on that table. 181 of them can blind a man or maim him. The remaining 682 were designed specifically to kill. This This is the insignia worn by the soldiers in Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal. There aren't many of them, but they're doing quite a job, both here and overseas. There are EOD detachments operating in many parts of the world, wherever our troops are stationed. These men have the responsibility for neutralizing all military explosive ordnance, domestic or foreign, that by accident or during wartime is fired, dropped, or clandestinely placed on United States territory and has failed to detonate. The only exceptions to this are underwater incidents, which are handled by the Navy, and incidents occurring on Marine or Air Force installations, which are handled by EOD personnel of the service involved. But even that rather formal statement doesn't cover the whole picture. They are also called on by local law enforcement agencies for assistance. They are also ready to face the grim possibility of enemy-delivered ordnance containing warheads loaded with chemical or bacteriological death. This is not a nuclear weapon. It carries no bacteria, no chemicals that kill, just the conventional high-explosive filler. But of course, to him, it really makes no difference. At this range, all bombs are fatal, and this is his working range. But in time of war, in the combat situation, it is more important than ever that he stake his life, that he gamble against time and the unpredictable mechanical device. For upon his ability to remove an obstacle depends the success or failure of a critical tactical maneuver. Now we ask the question, why? Why does a man volunteer for work that can kill him instantly if he makes the slightest mistake, the slightest slip, the most minute error? The excitement, a lack of monotony, the desire to save lives, the satisfaction of working with a proud, small group of men, all these reasons, and one more. That one is the age-old motivation, a challenge. He knows the thing is designed to kill him. He knows it's supposed to detonate and blow him to kingdom come. But he's damned if he's going to let it be the winner. And it is testimonial to the training, the intelligence, the skills and courage of these men that in the vast majority of incidents recorded in Army Explosive Ordnance Disposal records, the bomb has been the loser.
The war in Vietnam is a combined and joint effort. The man who is there, soldier, sailor, Marine, or airman, American, Korean, South Vietnamese, Australian, or New Zealander, already knows this well. The unit assembled in formation here, somewhere in Vietnam, is representative of all.
I have a letter addressed to all personnel of this command from the commanding general. During our tour in the Republic of Vietnam, we have all seen what communism can do to a struggling nation in our world community. It is therefore most important that we conduct our affairs with the people of the Republic of Vietnam in a manner that will show the Vietnamese citizen that we are his friends and that we are here to assist him in the improvement as well as the security of his country. It is then with great pride that I note the fine work done by the soldiers of this command during the recent operation. It is with pleasure that I say, a job well done.
These men have just emerged from many long days of combat during which they faced and fought the Viet Cong, drove him from areas which he had heretofore controlled, opened roads for travel which he had dominated, and thereby contributed substantially to the turning of the tide in Vietnam. Yet it is not for their military accomplishments alone, important though they are, that they are commended by their commander. It is for other activities, more subtle, less easy to grasp and define, yet every bit as indispensable to the final decision in the war that is being fought in Vietnam today. A war unique in the long history of armed conflict between men and nations. Some of the images of men at war don't change much across the generations. The ragged soldier who stood with Washington at Valley Forge seems to us almost to be a part of our own time. So immediate and meaningful is the symbol he presents. The tragic figures of the men in blue and gray who fought the Civil War that decided our course as a nation are not just misty historical shapes. They are familiar to us as part of our national experience. Now, these are photographs taken by Army cameramen of the war in Vietnam. But because the scenes of all wars are so much the same, they evoke memories in many of us of other battles in other times. There are men who can look at this picture and remember with a sharp tug that dissolves the years what it was like in those brief lulls between the battles of 2 decades ago. And others will think of Korea and the blistering summer heat of that war. For those who were there, this could be from any one of a dozen campaigns in the Pacific. Here's a shot of men and tanks moving out together to close with the enemy. And here's one of the warriors searching for spiritual strength. Images of men in combat which could be as much a part of the recent past as the present. But for all the similarities, there are differences too. Some of these are physical. Many of the techniques of war, for instance, change as technology advances. In Vietnam, the helicopter dramatizes that technological revolution. The fighting men there employ this machine to defeat problems of distance and terrain in a way that would have seemed incredible to the men who had to storm the murderous mountains of Korea. And probably no serviceman who has had to fight through Vietnam's monsoons will ever believe there was anything like it in any other war at any time. But most of all, to the men who are there, the distinctively urgent facts about Vietnam are the kind of war the enemy is fighting, and the special problems of the people. Not that the tragedy of uprooted people is new to the soldier. It's not. He's been forced to witness this ugly manifestation of war many times before. And he has helped whenever he can, as he is doing in Vietnam today, to alleviate the problems and the suffering of the people among whom he moves and lives and fights. But there's a difference in Vietnam, a big difference, and it revolves around the people. And it is this difference that makes the war there unique in the experience of the American soldier. Although this story we bring you today is basically a story of the soldier in Vietnam,
It is broader than that. It is the story of all our servicemen defending against aggression in that far-off land. And more, it is the story of the special task which all of them have, of helping to build a nation at the grassroots level, among the people, in the villages. This is the battleground in Vietnam, the varied and changing face of the land. But this, too, is the battlefield. The villages and the hamlets which dot the countryside. The communities across the land where 4/5 of the people live. And it is in this battlefield that the issue of victory or defeat will ultimately be decided. The reason is rooted in the special nature of the war that is being fought here. For this is a war whose objective is to win the hearts and the minds of the people. To understand why this is so, it is necessary to contrast this war with those we have fought in the past. Take Korea, for example. As in all the wars before it, it had a battle line. When the war was going against us, the battle line pushed in on us. But when we were on the offensive, the movement of the battle line described the progress of our victory. In this normal kind of military situation, the other side of that line was known to be enemy territory. And tragic though it was a fact to be accepted that cities and towns lying in areas controlled by the enemy often had to suffer the cost of victory's advance. But the war in Vietnam is different. Although our forces do engage in conventional combat with well-organized North Vietnamese military units who support the Viet Cong guerrillas, the enemy is active over most of the countryside, and rarely is there a conventional battle line. The job of the fighting men here is to search the enemy out wherever he hides, however he travels and supplies his forces, to seek him along all the avenues through which he infiltrates the Republic of Vietnam, carrying the weapons of his aggression. Their job is to find him. And then destroy him. But because the enemy over here is fighting basically an unconventional war, he does not rely on holding terrain, but more importantly, the people. The foundation of unconventional war rests on the need for their support. In this kind of struggle, whoever has the people wins the war. So it becomes the task of our troops to deny the enemy the popular support he has to have in order to survive. More than that, our troops must enlist that popular support behind their own effort and behind the government of the Republic of Vietnam. It is that government whose cause the American soldier represents to the people through whose villages he travels and fights. So the issue turns on the people in their villages and hamlets. And these become the ultimate battlefields of the war, as our side and the enemy both endeavor to win their support. As the war thus ebbs and flows through their lives in villages, the people themselves have little control over that constant movement. Nor, ironically, is the grave issue of the war, the threat to freedom which communist aggression poses, always clear to the people whose support will determine the ultimate decision. Their lives are lived at the edge of fundamental experiences. And it is the fundamentals with which they are concerned: poverty, hunger, disease, and a deep yearning to live in peace and without fear, for they have known the trials of war now for many long years. Their allegiance will go inevitably to the side which most clearly demonstrates a sympathetic interest in those fundamental problems. The winning of their support, then, takes other weapons beyond those in our arsenal of firepower. It takes the intangible weapons of compassion and goodwill. In the early phase of the war, the Viet Cong proved themselves adept at using those weapons, simply by persuading the people that they were their friends and protectors who would help to bring them a better life. The real objectives of communism were always underplayed or obscured entirely. They're still doing that as much as they can. But one factor has changed the direction of the war significantly: the big buildup of American forces. With the build-up, the Viet Cong's hold on the countryside started to loosen. And as that has happened, the enemy has turned more and more to the use of terror and murder as a way of maintaining his grip on the people, hoping to intimidate them into support as the voluntary support weakens. It has been his greatest mistake, for although it can have immediate effect, its long-term result can only work against him. The enemy's mistakes, of course, work to our advantage. But there is an obvious and urgent lesson: never to duplicate those mistakes. Not to be sure that there is any danger of our forces ever using terrorism as a weapon. But the people in the villages might not always be able to distinguish the difference between the calculated cruelty of communist forces and fire which rains on them and their families from an American rifle or an American plane. These special demands of this special war place a particular responsibility on every American in Vietnam. Commanders at all levels are obliged to consider the psychological as well as the military objectives of each operation. And because the circumstances call for an exercise of restraint beyond that normally required on a battlefield, they must strike a balance between the force essential to accomplish their mission and the necessity of inflicting as few casualties as possible on the civilian population. Now, this does not mean that the rules of safety and security can ever be relaxed. Every commander must always be able to accomplish his mission with the least loss to his own troops and the fewest possible restrictions on his planning and his freedom to fire and maneuver. Nor does it mean that men going into battle should ever place their own lives or those of their buddies in jeopardy through excessive caution. Every man must take with him into combat the certain knowledge that he has the inherent right always to defend himself against hostile action wherever and whenever it occurs. But this special responsibility does mean that firepower of all kinds has to be employed with care taken insofar as is humanly possible to avoid unnecessary damage to the lives and property of the civilian population. For the blunt truth is that death or injury to helpless civilians, even when it is unavoidable, works against us. This knowledge is simply one of the conditions of war which must be accepted. This special responsibility extends all the way along the chain of command, on every level and in every service. And it very specifically includes the man on the ground, who must face his personal responsibility through the sights of his personal weapon. For this man's job carries him into the very heart of this unique battlefield. Precautions to eliminate needless casualties are taken whenever possible, such as broadcasts or leaflets to warn civilians of impending airstrikes or operations. Always, of course, with due regard given to the security and success of the mission.
Sẽ có những thông cáo cho đồng bào. Xin đồng bào hãy tuân theo những thông cáo của đồng bào chú ý. Xin đồng bào chú ý. Làng của các đồng bào đã được quân đội và những quân
The villages have to be entered. They have to be searched and made safe. This remains an inescapable duty of war. But with careful plans made and executed, with every precaution taken that can be, within the bounds of safety, and with every man aware of his own increased responsibility, it is done with the least possible damage and danger. Operations planned in coordination with the country's province or district chiefs help smooth the path the rest of the way. For they can explain better than anyone else, at least in the beginning, that the Americans are here as friends.
Quân đội Mỹ đến đây để giúp đỡ cho đồng bào. Vậy đồng bào phải ráng cố gắng để mà tỏ làm sao để mà xứng đáng với cái việc mà người Mỹ đến giúp đỡ mình.
As friends. That's how our forces come into the villages of Vietnam, how they must come.
Để chiến đấu cộng sản vậy phần của mình là phải giúp người Mỹ đã hoàn thành sứ mạng họ tại đây.
Friendship is one of the most basic gifts a man can offer. It is built on the desire really to know people. The soldier has a special opportunity to try to understand what Vietnam and its people are like. Vietnam is an old country, with a recorded history that goes back more than 2,000 years. Its traditions and its customs are ancient and deeply cherished. The Vietnamese himself, humble peasant though he may be, is the inheritor of this old tradition. And anyone who would claim his friendship must understand that about him. He looks on the world in a very set way, defined and shaped by a long tradition. It is a world that lies always close to the soil and the elements. His village is more than his home. It is his universe, and he seldom, if ever, leaves it. The values which shape his code of behavior are his most precious possessions, and they are honored ones. Dignity, self-control, respect for elders. His family is all important to him, all his family, not only those immediately close to him, but distant relatives as well, those living, those dead, and those in generations yet to come. Regard for the family is at the center of his religion. The majority of villages in Vietnam are Buddhist. Many, like this one, are Catholic, some are Protestant. Whichever it is, the place of worship in the village is the focal point of community life. Knowing these things about the Vietnamese people and understanding the importance they have in their lives help our troops to establish the friendship that is so crucial to their mission. But beyond endeavoring to know and understand the Vietnamese, there is much more for the soldier to do.
You ready? One again, okay? One, two, three, four, airborne! All the way!
The ease with which the American fighting man establishes rapport with the children in the lands through which he travels is an enduring part of his legend. There is no mystery about it, for the hungry language of childhood is universal. And men at war have known for generations that candy and chewing gum bring smiles and warm the hearts of children in any land. But there is more to this legend than candy and gifts. And every man knows it who has watched happiness brighten the eye of a child as the result of his own effort. It does not always happen quickly. Even a child's friendship is sometimes slow to come. And how much more true this is of people who have known bitterly only the brutality of war and warriors, and who can escape only behind thick walls of silence and suspicion. Their friendship is not obtained easily, but with patience and effort, it can be won. A civic action plan supports every military operation, not because we believe that friendship has a price which we can pay with giveaways and handouts, but because we thus have the opportunity to show in a definite, tangible way that our interests really lie with the people and their problems. Food, and sometimes clothing supplied by the various aid agencies, are often as important to take on combat operations as any other kind of cargo. They are not lightly given, nor are they lightly received. To people who live always on the edge of want, whose days blend into a continuing challenge to wrest enough from the earth to still their children's hunger, such gifts are deeply important, and the gesture of giving becomes deeply meaningful. To people whose lives are shadowed and haunted by disease, who must suffer pain and illness because no help for suffering is available to them, whose health and well-being are doomed to the harsh conditions of a harsh life. To such a people, the attentions of a military medical team are powerful symbols indeed of a desire for friendship. Even soap, in a community which has none, and therefore is vulnerable to the ravages that such a simple item can prevent, becomes a weapon with almost magic powers. Every military unit has the capability of helping to improve a community in some way. Simple construction material, for instance, and a little paint and a few hours' work can pay rich and lasting dividends. Particularly work done side by side with the people themselves. For the Vietnamese people are both proud and industrious. They welcome the assistance of our forces, and together they can accomplish much. A new roof for the community meeting center, a place for the children to go to school, a new face for the house of worship, a well, a bridge. These can work for us with wonderful effect. Helping the people to gather in their precious rice crop and protect it from the Viet Cong, as these Marines are doing, can be as important as any military engagement. For all of this is evidence which will stand as lasting reminders that the Americans who came this way, as allies of their government, came as friends. Establishing friendships in the villages of Vietnam can also produce tangible results. Intelligence information, for instance, which can save the lives of American troops. The war our forces wage in Vietnam today is slow and hard and grinding. From the storehouse of our nation's power, they are bringing to it the might with which they can eventually destroy the enemy's strength. From reservoirs of compassion and generosity, they bring a spirit and a demonstration of friendship. And these too become weapons, as powerful as any other in this war, which is a contest for the hearts and the minds of the people of Vietnam. They are weapons that will touch and stir the hopes of those through whose villages the fighting men travel, and when they pass on, will leave a deposit of warm feelings behind.
Let's go. All right, let's move out.
And so they move on, through village after village, hopefully leaving new friends as they travel on. Now, that doesn't mean that each village is secured forever when they leave it. Oh, no, the war isn't that simple. But their job is to continue pressing the war until the enemy they fight is convinced his aggression will not pay. And hand in hand with their fighting, the soldiers in Vietnam must carry on their crucial task of helping to build a nation all the way to the heart and soul of the smallest hamlet.
Peace is a time when sons bury fathers. War is a time when fathers bury sons. Peace in freedom is the most valuable possession of any society. And peace, every day of it, must be bought and paid for. As the principal power in a military alliance of the free world, the goal of the United States is to use its strength to maintain the peace against the threat of conquest. In a dangerous and changing world, a massive military establishment is necessary to our common defense. This is the responsibility of the President, and under him, by law, the Secretary of Defense is charged with securing and maintaining that military establishment. The Secretary is Mr. Robert S. McNamara.
Recoilless rifle. I have here one of the new family of Communist Chinese weapons. This is a light machine gun of their 7.62 class. Ammunition for this can only be supplied from Chinese sources. This gun bears the Chinese arsenal mark and has obviously been manufactured in that country, supplied by China to North Vietnam, infiltrated by North Vietnam into the south.
A Chinese gun. Routes of infiltration. The Secretary keeps America informed through regular news conferences. For an informed nation is a prepared nation. And the United States today is prepared against every form of aggression, from guerrilla warfare to ballistic missiles. An American desert. This is an early test before our country, along with over 100 other nations, agreed to cease atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons. For today, our nuclear power is such that, in the words of our president, the combined destructive power of every battle ever fought by man is like a firecracker against the sun. This is the awesome power. And the power we have today is more than that of any adversary or combination of adversaries. The fact that we have it is the greatest deterrent to nuclear war. Helping to protect us against nuclear attack are radar installations, networks of sensitive nerve ends, part of the ballistic missile early warning system called BMEWS. A nerve center of our defense alert system is this underground headquarters of the Strategic Air Command. No surprise ballistic missile attack could catch us unprepared. For in underground silos, enough of our retaliatory power would survive to assure the destruction of any aggressor nation. This is the terrible power that stands ever ready. This is the awesome power, always under control as it is here in Holy Loch, Scotland, where a Polaris missile is being lowered into a nuclear submarine. The United States is able to launch ballistic missiles in a matter of seconds from beneath the sea. Our nuclear weapons can be delivered by air against any enemy to any part of the earth. The weapons this air armada can deliver today are capable of even greater destructive force than in this early Pacific Ocean test. This is part of the military strength of the United States, the greatest of any nation in the history of the world. This is the power of retaliation that has made and keeps full-scale nuclear war the least probable of any kind of conflict. But there are other kinds of war, other challenges we must meet, and we must have the capability, the balanced defensive forces to meet any of them. It is a formidable task to blend this vast array of weapons so that we may have a fully balanced defense structure, the fly swatter as well as the sledgehammer. To understand how we achieved this, we must go back to 1961, when the new president issued two positive instructions to his new Secretary of Defense. One, reappraise our entire defense strategy and determine the best defense structure in the world without regard to arbitrary budget ceilings. Two, having determined that defense structure, procure and maintain it at the lowest sound cost. And so it began to emerge, a defense structure that could program and budget in cycles projected 5 years into the future. The direction set, New concepts put into action, records compiled into reports, analyzed, rewritten, converted from paperwork into action. Men began to talk of tasks to be performed and missions to be accomplished, rather than in terms of 4 separate military services. The defense effort began to develop into a unified whole, all services cooperating closely, place and time acquiring new meaning, the worldwide installations becoming a panorama for study and observation, and, along the way, visions becoming revisions, revisions becoming reality. One example, the F-111, the greatest innovation in aircraft design of recent years, a fighter and bomber to serve both the Air Force and the Navy. A new kind of plane with adjustable wings for greater efficiency at both high and low speeds. Other accomplishments were the SR-71, a long-range supersonic reconnaissance craft with the most advanced observation equipment in the world. The Polaris A-3, America's longest-range submarine-launched ballistic missile, soon to be followed by Poseidon, a missile now under development, 8 times more effective against the best protected military targets. And the Nike X, the world's most advanced anti-ballistic missile system, now in development. A test vehicle is launched, and seconds later, a Nike Zeus pursues it. Here, in actual photography, the flash indicates a successful intercept of the test vehicle by Nike Zeus. Meanwhile, the Secretary of Defense and the Joint Chiefs of Staff continue to improve America's defense posture. Some significant accomplishments. Nuclear warheads in our strategic forces increased 150%. A 200% increase in both the number and total megatonnage of nuclear weapons in the Strategic Alert Forces. A 100% increase in general ship construction and conversion to modernize the fleet. A 1,000% increase in the special forces trained to deal with counterinsurgency threats. A 100% increase in airlift capability. A 67% increase in tactical nuclear weapons deployed in Western Europe. A 51% increase in the number of tactical fighter squadrons. A 45% increase in the number of combat-ready Army divisions. And all the while, in addition to these increases and others, a constant sharpening of the efficiency of our military manpower. All these improvements, all these new weapons programs, all this vision now give us total readiness for any kind of warfare. To achieve this, the size, the flexibility, costs money. Yet, while the capability increases, there has also been an extensive cost reduction program. Secretary McNamara explains.
Last evening, I received the near final estimate for the Department of Defense expenditures in fiscal year 1965, the year which ended June 30th. These expenditures total approximately $47.5 billion. That's $3.75 billion less than we estimated when the budget was submitted to Congress over a year ago. A major factor contributing to this $3.75 billion saving has been the Defense Department's cost reduction program. The efficiency increases derive from 3 basic parts of the program: from buying only what we need, from buying that at the lowest sound cost, and from reducing operating costs. One of the most important actions taken to refine requirements is illustrated by this Minuteman missile part. This is the guidance system of the Minuteman missile. It must be replaced periodically. It has been our custom to maintain for such high-cost items a 62 days inventory supply. In this instance, we placed that requirement on order. We subsequently calculated, however, that by careful control of transportation and the repair cycle, we could eliminate about 45 days of that 62-day supply. We canceled the order for 32 of these components at a price of $900,000 apiece, and we've saved, therefore, in fiscal 65, about $28.5 million through this single action alone. As an illustration of refining the specifications to eliminate unnecessary characteristics, to simplify the design, to ensure they're directly related to military utility, what we call eliminating gold plating, there are several interesting examples. Here's a cartridge case. Before redesign, it had 6 parts. We simplified the design, cut them in half, reduced the price by more than half, and on that single item saved about $1 million in fiscal 1965. So much then for buying only what we need. The next category of action is headed buying at the lowest sound price. I think we've reported to you before the series of actions that we are taking to accomplish this. They fall under 4 headings. First, we are shifting from non-competitive to competitive procurement. Secondly, we're shifting from cost-plus contracts to fixed-price or price-incentive contracts. Thirdly, we're procuring where possible directly from the manufacturer instead of through a middleman. And fourthly, we're consolidating more than 1 year's procurement and placing it on contract at a single time. Now, the third section of the program deals with reductions in operating costs. Here we saved about $1.75 billion in 1965. You're familiar with the most important category of actions in this section, the elimination of surplus and obsolete bases, and I'll bring you up to date on our program. By over 700 actions, we have released to other sectors of our society, either the private sector or civilian use in the public sector, 1,600,000 acres of land. That's in excess of 2,500 square miles, some 64 industrial plants, with annual savings in excess of $1 billion. Now, all of this, of course, represents a program to increase the efficiency of our operations. This is not our primary responsibility. Our primary responsibility is to provide the forces which this nation needs as a solid foundation for its foreign policy. We believe it necessary to increase those forces. We've done so. Your
cost reduction, far from decreasing our military might, has steadily increased it. We shall continue to meet our military commitments as we have in the past. Berlin, 1961, where we responded effectively to the challenge of Soviet pressure on West Germany. Cuba, 1962, where we halted the introduction of Russian missiles. And recently, the small-scale war. Conflict held carefully below the threshold of nuclear war, a new kind of aggression which has become a major weapon of the communist forces. Our new defense structure permits us to meet such aggression on its own terms. The Gulf of Tonkin incident illustrates this capability for instant retaliation against unprovoked attack. Our ships were in international waters, where they had every right to be, when they were attacked by North Vietnamese torpedo boats. We returned the fire to defend ourselves. The task force stood ready to deliver an effective response. Orders immediately came from Washington to protect our ships by striking at the North Vietnamese bases from which the torpedo boats operated. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was quickly over. Our prompt, efficient action, appropriate response. Where, when, and in the manner needed. Entirely different in nature was our response to the devastating effect of an earthquake in the Central American Republic of El Salvador. Our reaction to a request for aid was equally rapid, equally efficient. In less than 12 hours, airlifted equipment and supplies were arriving. 250,000 pounds delivered to emergency shelter sites. 3 United States Army field kitchens immediately set up to feed the homeless. Tent cities erected. U.S. military medical personnel supplied to treat the sick and injured in cooperation with local doctors and public health officials. This is but one more example of the capability of the Defense Department to take swift action in any emergency, whether it be a challenge from an adversary or a cry for help from a distressed nation. Another call for help, now from the Dominican Republic, as rebel forces turn Santo Domingo into a battlefield. The Dominican government informs our ambassador that the safety of Americans and citizens of other nations can no longer be guaranteed. Again, prompt, decisive response. We landed sufficient forces into the city and deployed them to protect our citizens and those of other countries requesting protection. American civilians and other nationals requesting safe passage were transported to the airfield under military escort. In a still dangerous situation, we continued to deploy our protective troops along the city's streets. And then, as the Organization of American States designated a 5-nation team to restore order, we began to withdraw our military forces. This assistance to the Dominican Republic extended far beyond military aid. It meant the distribution of food to the hungry. It also meant medical care to young and old alike, all part of our determined plan to aid the distressed, rescue the trapped, and speed assistance to independent nations seeking help. But across the world, the flames of war are fanned by ever-increasing aggression against South Vietnam. Treachery and cruelty by the Viet Cong. Not only villages and towns destroyed, but transportation as well. The South Vietnamese military forces have been fighting the Viet Cong for years, wherever they could find them. Sometimes it was across the dry, hot plains under a merciless sun. Sometimes it was in rice paddies during the steamy monsoon season. And sometimes it was from the very trains the Viet Cong tried to destroy. Whatever the season, there was always the jungle, tangled, hostile, forbidding. A jungle where the Viet Cong melted away into the dense undergrowth whenever attacked. Wherever they fought, the South Vietnamese gave no quarter and asked for none. Viet Cong and infiltrated North Vietnamese are flushed out step by step, while the search continues by wary patrols, day in, day out. And like all wars, this war demands its cruel price in terms of human suffering. At the request of the South Vietnamese, the United States, under 3 American presidents, has been providing military assistance and advisors without interruption. In the air, we developed a way to overcome the rugged Vietnamese terrain by making air highways with helicopters. And then, suddenly, aircraft and airstrips were damaged as infiltrators from North Vietnam grew more bold, striking directly at U.S. equipment and at our men. Living quarters of American advisors to the South Vietnamese are destroyed. The infiltration, commanded and directed from North Vietnam, increases. Secretary McNamara holds a news conference to tell of our response.
South Vietnamese Air Force and U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force strikes against North Vietnam have been designed to impede this infiltration of men and materiel. An infiltration which makes the difference between a situation which is manageable and one which is not manageable internally by the government of South Vietnam. The airstrikes have been carefully limited to military targets, primarily to infiltration targets, transit points, to barracks, to supply depots, to ammunition depots, to routes of communication, all feeding the infiltration lines from North Vietnam into Laos and thence into South Vietnam. More recently, there has been added to this target system railroads, highways, and bridges, which are the foundation of the infiltration routes. These strikes have been designed to increase the dependence on an already overburdened road transport system by denying the use of the rail lines in the South. In summary, our objectives have been to force them off the rails onto the highways and off the highways onto their feet.
The fighting in South Vietnam continues. Although military targets in North Vietnam are heavily hit, the numbers of infiltrated North Vietnamese soldiers into the South steadily increases. The Viet Cong terrorizes the countryside continually with savage hit-and-run tactics. The rapid increase of infiltration begins to create an unfavorable manpower balance. Secretary McNamara addresses the nation on this serious problem.
According to the latest intelligence information available to us, the number of hardcore, that is the number of full-time Viet Cong communist regular combat and combat support forces in South Vietnam totals approximately 65,000 men. In addition to that, there are between 80 and 100,000 part-time or irregular guerrillas. The regular and irregular guerrilla forces, therefore, total about 165,000.
The Secretary goes on to announce that there is to be a buildup of American ground combat forces in South Vietnam to help overcome the unfavorable manpower balance. This increased military support by the United States starts arriving shortly and is the largest free world contribution to South Vietnam's struggle against communist aggression. In addition to these American troops, other nations, great and small, contribute financial support and manpower, including combat troops from Australia, New Zealand, and Korea. Our combat forces were deployed to areas known to be Viet Cong strongholds. Once again, the helicopter becomes indispensable in the struggle against the communist terrorists who, like quicksilver, break up and spread to inaccessible areas when they are attacked. But very little, if anything, is inaccessible to our troops in helicopters. But helicopters and modern equipment cannot be the full answer. For here in Vietnam, it is still up to the individual fighting man to go by foot to seek out, find, and destroy the enemy. Tactical airstrikes support the infantryman's efforts, helping to eliminate the hardcore Viet Cong. The Navy provides fire support for ground operations. And finally, prisoners of war. All of this massive American effort because the people and the government of the United States have a commitment to the South Vietnamese people and to freedom. For us, a commitment is a matter of national honor. We intend to keep it. Our objective in Southeast Asia is a limited one. We are not seeking to destroy the North Vietnamese people. We do not seek military bases in South Vietnam. We are seeking to help the South Vietnamese people retain their right to control their own destiny, to develop politically, economically, and socially as they choose, without interference from foreign directed aggression. This is our commitment in South Vietnam, and every commitment must be bought and paid for.
In a world of 120 nations, the defense of freedom remains this nation's duty, all day, every day of the year. As President Johnson has said, upon our strength and upon our wisdom rests the future, not only of our American way of life, but of the great society of free men. And the President has also said, let the world know we walk the road of peace because we have the strength we need. With our strength, we seek to shelter the peace of mankind. We are armed to ensure our own security, and we're armed to encourage the settlement of international differences by peaceful processes. The United States does have and will continue to have a commanding superiority of arms, but those arms are not for conquest.